David and Colleen, the golden couple everyone admired, had met at a raucous college party, their eyes locking across a room pulsing with music and laughter. That night, they had fallen hard and fast, the kind of love that poets wax lyrical about. Over the years, their bond became a fortress, unshaken by life's battering storms. But even the mightiest fortresses can crumble. Their spark, once a roaring blaze, had dimmed to a flicker. The daily grind, work pressures, and the numbing monotony of routine gnawed at the foundations of their marriage. Colleen, restless and seeking the thrill that once came so effortlessly, found herself captivated by the flirtations of a younger man. A dangerous game, but one she couldn't resist playing. David sat in the living room, lost in memories. He remembered their early days, laughter that echoed like music, dreams that soared high. Now, those memories felt like they belonged to another life. He watched Colleen, dressed to kill, getting ready for another night out. She looked stunning, a stark contrast to their increasingly casual and distant interactions at home. "Don't give me that look, David," Colleen said, slipping on her heels. "Women in their 40s often seek younger companionship." David, leaning back and swirling his drink, responded with a cold smile. "And often end up divorced." Colleen's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and arrogance. "You won't divorce me," she said with unnerving certainty. "You love me, and I love you. This is just a diversion. You wouldn't throw away our commitment over something so small." David's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Oh, how modern of you," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're right, it's practically a trend. Even Joan Bennett, Mrs. Picture Perfect herself, has a lover. Isn't it just darling how everyone pretends their marriages are fine while screwing around behind closed doors?" Colleen's expression hardened, but she said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, fraught with the unspoken words that hung in the air. David took a long sip of his drink, eyes never leaving hers. "Go on then, Colleen. Enjoy your night out. Just remember, every diversion has its price." When the doorbell rang, Colleen shot a glance at David. "Can you get that?" she asked, though she knew the answer already. David didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Nope," he replied flatly, as if she'd just asked him to walk across hot coals. "I'm not welcoming your boyfriend." With a sigh, Colleen opened the door to Ryan, her 32-year-old date, waiting patiently on the porch. "Sorry about that," she said, gesturing towards the living room where David remained entrenched. "He's having a hard time with this whole thing." Ryan gave her a reassuring smile, the kind that seemed to say, "No worries. I've seen worse." He was calm, understanding. It was part of what drew her to him. Back inside, Colleen tried to calm the storm brewing in David. "Ryan's not my boyfriend," she said, planting herself firmly in front of him. "Yet. And let's not forget, we've been together 20 years. I've been loyal, supportive. I deserve a little freedom." David glared at her, feeling the sting of disrespect. "Yeah, freedom to do what? Date some guy you met at Starbucks?" Colleen nodded, unabashed. She met Ryan at the Starbucks in her office building, where his flirty banter made her feel young and alive. All her friends were having affairs with younger men, so why not her? Tonight was just another step in that direction. Ryan pulled up in a sleek, late-model Mercedes, the kind that screamed, "I've made it." At the restaurant, he tipped the valet like it was pocket change and ushered Colleen inside with an air of easy confidence. "I'm delighted you agreed to go out with me, Colleen. You're an incredibly beautiful woman." She smiled, appreciating the compliment but feeling the need to set boundaries. "Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate your attention, but I love my husband. I'm not leaving him." Ryan nodded, unperturbed. "All I wanted was an evening out with a beautiful, intelligent woman, and here we are." The evening flowed smoothly, their earlier coffee chats having laid the groundwork. After a delightful dinner, they hit a jazz club, swaying to the music. Ryan grew bolder, his hand resting on her thigh. She didn't mind. In fact, it was thrilling. Around midnight, they finally left the club. In the car, they kissed, a passionate, heated exchange that left Colleen breathless. But she pulled back. "I should get home." "When can I see you again?" Ryan asked, eyes glinting with anticipation. "I can't meet you every day. Maybe Sunday? Do you like the ballet? My cousin can get us good tickets." "I've never been, but I'd love to go. David isn't into artsy stuff. I'll meet you instead of picking you up at home." "What time?" "It's a matinee. Let's meet for lunch at 11 a.m. They settled the details and drove back to Colleen's house. She kissed Ryan goodbye, steeling herself for whatever awaited inside. To her surprise, David was already in bed, asleep. In the bathroom, she wiped away her makeup, pondering whether to wake him. She feared a silent, cold morning if she didn't. "David," she called softly. He stirred, barely awake. "What? Do you want to talk?" "No, I want to sleep." "Okay, I'll get ready for bed." He started to rise, but she stopped him. "Actually, I have a question." She stepped out in her nightgown, a deliberate choice to show she was still his. "Okay," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Did you have sex with him?" David asked bluntly. "No, David. It was just a date. I've never had sex on a first date, you know that." David nodded, but his skepticism remained. "Yeah, but now you're just looking for a sex buddy, not a husband. I thought maybe things had changed. Are you seeing him again?" "We're going to the ballet on Sunday and having lunch," David scoffed. "So this isn't supposed to affect us, but you're seeing him Friday night and Sunday afternoon, our usual time together." "Interesting," Colleen sighed, realizing he wasn't listening anymore. He lay down, turning his back to her. She finished getting ready for bed, hoping against hope that David would come to terms with their new reality. The next morning, Colleen wasn't surprised David was gone. She expected an adjustment period. She hoped he'd be back soon as she planned to spend Sunday with him. But as the day progressed, she realized he was avoiding her. Knowing he often worked Saturdays, she decided to check his office. She wasn't surprised to find his car there. After signing in at the security desk, she took the elevator to the 7th floor and went to David's office, as she had many times before. "Hello, David," she greeted. "Colleen, Oscar told me you were coming up." "What do you want?" David asked. "To spend time with my husband," she replied. "Really? Boyfriend busy today?" David shot back. "Stop being childish, David. You've never been the only person in my life. I see my friends every day," Colleen argued. "Unless you're having sex with them, it's not the same," David countered. "I'm sorry this is hard for you. I've tried to assure you that my actions won't affect our marriage or my feelings for you. I love you and want a long life together," she pleaded. "Then why are you doing this, Colleen? Is hurting me how you show love? You're being incredibly selfish," David accused. "I could say the same. My relationship with him is no more significant to our marriage than my friendships." "I don't understand your objection," she stated. "You can't even say his name. Keeping him anonymous doesn't make it less harmful," David pointed out. "You know, I don't recall the last time I went on a date with a friend, but I did with him last night and will again tomorrow. He seems more important," David continued. "As I said last night, these are the only times I can get to know him. I've never just jumped into bed with someone, even in college," Colleen explained. "Until you get to the screwing stage," David interjected. "Yes, I'll be discreet so you don't know when it happens, and I'll keep it separate from our time together," she assured him. "Great, at least you'll be discreet," David replied sarcastically. "Anything else?" Colleen winced but didn't protest, hoping to avoid further conflict. "I wanted to spend the day together," she added. "As I told you last week, the quarterly reports are due. I'm always here all day Saturday before compiling data. I expected us to spend Friday evening and Sunday together, but I guess I'm not a priority," David said bitterly. "Oh, David, I'm sorry. With everything going on, I forgot," Colleen apologized. "Whatever. I have work to do," he dismissed her. "It matters to me," Colleen insisted. "Okay then, how about we go to the coast tonight after I finish? We can have dinner at Devereaux's and spend the day tomorrow," David suggested. "Well, the ballet tickets are paid for. I'd feel bad canceling now," Colleen hesitated. "That's okay, Colleen. I didn't expect you to say yes. You can leave now." David had stopped listening. She sighed and left, hoping it would go better. She thought he'd eventually be glad she was happy and accept her assurances. Her plan was to spend a few dates getting to know Ryan better before having sex, intending to meet him only when David was unavailable. She didn't want this to interfere with her marriage, but she wanted this. David didn't come home until nearly midnight, as was usual before quarterly reports. Colleen realized he knew she'd choose Ryan over a last-minute plan. She hoped David might be feeling amorous tonight. He often enjoyed low-key closeness after long days, and sometimes they'd end up making love. She loved him and wanted to make him happy. She waited for him, undressed under the comforter, her bare shoulders visible. "How was work, honey?" she asked as he entered the bedroom. "Same as usual. I got all the data compiled and sorted, so next week's reporting should go smoothly," David replied. He began undressing in the bedroom but went into the bathroom to strip down. When he emerged in shorts, Colleen lowered the comforter to reveal herself. "Darling, I thought we could reconnect tonight," she suggested. "Are you sure your boyfriend wouldn't mind?" David retorted. "David, comments like that aren't helpful. Can't we just enjoy ourselves tonight as husband and wife?" Colleen pleaded. David was conflicted. Despite her actions, he still loved her and was aroused by her. He believed she hadn't slept with Ryan yet, but assumed they had made out. He hoped to win her back before she went through with it, knowing he wouldn't touch her if she did. He dropped his shorts, and Colleen smiled. They spent the next 2 hours reconnecting, hoping to satisfy each other's needs. David hoped she'd abandon her plans for Ryan, while Colleen hoped to show she could fulfill David's needs while seeking satisfaction elsewhere. The next morning, David tried to keep her in bed, expressing his love. As time passed, he sensed her unease. At 10 o'clock, Colleen got up. "I'm sorry, David. I have to get ready." She chose Ryan over him again. "Sure." David put on his shorts, feeling particularly offended by being undressed in front of her as she prepared to meet her lover. He left the room without another look. Colleen felt sorrow watching him leave. She enjoyed their time together, but reluctantly got ready to meet Ryan. She showered, not wanting to meet Ryan with the scent of David on her. She dressed in a modest but alluring outfit and called for David to say goodbye, but there was no answer. Seeing their Mustang gone, she realized he had left. She sighed and drove to meet Ryan, not noticing the sedan following her. Ryan was waiting and assured her it was no problem she was a bit late. They were seated quickly, and she forgot about David in Ryan's presence. The lunch conversation flowed, and she enjoyed herself. The food was excellent, and she briefly thought of suggesting David dine there with her sometime. The ballet was beautiful, and Ryan's knowledge impressed her. He explained the story and meanings behind certain movements, making her aware of the experiences she hadn't had with David. It wasn't a criticism, just an observation of their differences and how they complemented each other. She hoped to get David on board, thinking Ryan could be more than just a fling. After the ballet, they drove to a local hill country overlook with a magnificent view of the city skyline. Colleen knew she wasn't the first woman Ryan had brought here, but didn't mind. "You're such a beautiful woman, Colleen. I feel lucky you're here with me," he said. "Then I guess we're both lucky, Ryan," Colleen said, as they started making out intensely. She felt dizzy with desire for him and wondered if she could wait until the 5th date. Reluctantly, she pulled away and Ryan was visibly disappointed. "I'm sorry, Ryan, I want to, but I have boundaries," she explained. "I know, Colleen," Ryan replied. "I get that you want to be comfortable before going further, but all our coffee dates should count for something. You're right, we did get to know each other well before our first official date. Maybe I'm being too rigid," she conceded. "When can you do a long lunch?" "Not Monday, but Tuesday works. I need time to clean up before going home, so plan accordingly," Ryan said. "I'll bring what's needed. I'll give you details tomorrow morning at Starbucks," Colleen agreed. Ryan drove her back to the restaurant where her car was parked. She got home around 6:30 p.m., feeling elated. She checked her phone for a message from David, but found none. Quickly changing into loungewear, she started dinner when she heard the garage door. "Hi, honey. Have a good drive?" she asked as David entered. "It was fine," he replied curtly. She tried to kiss him, but he turned his cheek, still upset about her leaving his bed for Ryan. At least he was talking to her, though briefly. She hoped last night's lovemaking would help, but it seemed leaving him this morning had erased the goodwill. He didn't ask about her day. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, Colleen informed him. "That's fine. I'll be in the office," David said. Colleen quickly made teriyaki stir-fry with rice and called David to dinner. He washed up and joined her. She tried to make conversation. "Where'd you drive today?" she asked. "Nowhere in particular. I just drove on the highway," he replied. "Did you stop anywhere?" she continued. "I had lunch at a small deli off the freeway and stretched my legs a few times. That's it," David said. Colleen tried talking about her day. "The ballet." "I have no interest in your date, Colleen," David interrupted. "This isn't about that. I was just..." Not another word about it. "I just wanted..." David got up, leaving his meal half-eaten, and went to his office. Colleen sat for a few minutes, then cleared the table and packaged the leftovers for David's lunch. She spent the evening straightening the house, hoping David would come out of his office. She wanted to salvage the evening and share the beauty of the ballet, hoping it might interest him in the future, separate from Ryan. Later, she prepared for bed and started reading, still hoping David would join her. Near midnight, she guessed he was waiting for her to fall asleep first. She went to his office. "Are you coming to bed?" she asked. "Eventually. I have things to finish," he replied. "Please, David, come to bed. Lay beside me, make love, cuddle, or just lay quietly. Please don't avoid me," Colleen pleaded. "I told you, Colleen, I have things to finish. If you think that's avoidance, I can't help it. The sooner I finish, the sooner I can come to bed." "So, excuse me," David said. Colleen reluctantly left and returned to bed, no longer interested in reading. She wondered if she was feeling guilty and interpreting his actions through that lens, but dismissed the idea. She believed she was doing nothing wrong and still loved David. She thought he was avoiding her on purpose. Not wanting to make things worse, she turned off the light and closed her eyes, quickly falling asleep. She woke up alone the next morning, finding that David had already left for work. Unsure if he had ever come to bed, she felt increasingly frustrated with his attitude. She had reassured him that nothing would change in their marriage, but he remained intent on feeling hurt. Deciding not to beg him anymore, she planned to continue with Ryan while being a loving wife to David. She dressed and headed to Starbucks as usual to meet her friends. Spotting Ryan in the corner, she joined him after getting her coffee. "I couldn't stop thinking about you last night, Colleen," Ryan said. "Same here, Ryan. I'm looking forward to tomorrow," she replied. He handed her a note. "Here's the info for tomorrow. My condo offers more privacy than a hotel," Ryan said. "Thank you for being discreet, Ryan. I don't want to hurt my husband more than he already is," Colleen said. "Of course." They chatted a bit before Ryan left for work. Colleen then met with Joan, Marge, Ellen, and Gail. Although she knew her friends had lovers, she hadn't shared her plans, fearing it might hurt David if it became public. That night, David greeted her warmly, and they had a pleasant dinner, avoiding the topic of Ryan. Colleen felt hopeful that David was starting to understand her relationship with Ryan wouldn't affect their marriage. She didn't realize he was trying to dissuade her from pursuing a lover. The next day, Colleen arrived at Ryan's condo with anticipation. As soon as she stepped inside, Ryan pulled her close, and they quickly became physically engaged. Within minutes, they were making love, and Colleen experienced an intense pleasure she hadn't felt in years. Afterward, they relaxed in each other's arms. "That was amazing, Ryan," Colleen said, breathless. "Better than your husband?" Ryan asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Colleen sat up and looked him in the eye. "My husband is off limits. He's a wonderful lover. If you turn this into a contest, I'm leaving, and it will never happen again. Clear?" "Of course. I meant no harm, just concerned about your satisfaction," Ryan replied quickly. She settled back into his arms. "It was very good. I enjoy being with you and look forward to more." They spent the next 2 hours in a more affectionate manner. Colleen appreciated Ryan's responsiveness and enjoyed their time together. Ryan found her to be a perfect fit for a long-term, mutually beneficial relationship with no intention of marriage. After nearly 3 hours, Colleen showered, using her own soap and shampoo, leaving them at Ryan's condo for future visits. With a final deep kiss, they said goodbye, and she drove home while Ryan returned to work. Colleen calmed herself as she waited for David. She checked herself in the mirror repeatedly to ensure everything was in place. If David didn't know about her meetings with Ryan, it would help smooth things over. When David walked in at 7:13 p.m., Colleen greeted him warmly with a hug and kiss. Initially, he responded, but then his arms dropped and she felt his body slump. Concern filled her face as she pulled away. "You had sex with him today, didn't you?" David accused. "What? David, why do you say that?" Colleen asked, trying to remain calm. "You're a creature of habit, Colleen, and I know those habits. A midday shower was common when we were younger and active, but not in recent years, until today." "I haven't," Colleen started to protest. "The smell of your soap and shampoo is strong. The only reason is that you showered recently, likely to wash off being with him. I appreciate you not smelling like the other man, but it gave you away." He pushed past her and went into the office. "Damn it," Colleen muttered to herself. She thought her plan had worked and hadn't considered the strong scent. She realized she needed to rethink her approach. Sighing, she started dinner, making broiled chicken breast with carrots and linguine. She set the table and went to the office. "David, dinner's ready," she called. "I'm not hungry," he replied curtly. "You need to eat," she insisted. "I'll get something later. I don't want anything you cooked," David said. Suddenly not hungry either, Colleen packed up the food as leftovers. She hated wasting food, even though they were wealthy. She spent the evening trying to figure out how to see Ryan without David knowing. She never considered not seeing Ryan at all. She went to bed alone, falling asleep quickly, thanks to her satisfaction from being with Ryan. She woke at 4 a.m. to find David asleep at his desk. She shook him awake. "David, you can't sleep like this. Come to bed or go to the spare room. This is bad for your back. I know you're angry, but I still love you and want to take care of you. Please." David, disoriented, allowed her to lead him to their bedroom. As she began undressing him, he remembered the events and resisted. Stop, Colleen. David, I'm just trying to get you ready for bed. Please, just a few more buttons, she pleaded. Get your filthy hands off me, David said sharply. Colleen shrank away. David rarely raised his voice in their 25 years together. She sat at her vanity, trying to hold back tears. I'm sorry I raised my voice, Colleen, but you wouldn't stop. I just didn't want you touching me with hands that had been on another man's body, David said, his voice softer but still firm. David, I've showered and washed my hands, but I understand it's more in your mind. I'm sorry. I'll leave you to it. Colleen busied herself elsewhere, believing David would eventually come to terms with her affair. She never considered ending her relationship with Ryan. She saw it as a test of her resolve. After a while, she checked on David, who was asleep. She returned to bed and slept well. The next day, David worked late, informing her via text. She realized she couldn't do more to help him through this and knew what she needed to say next time they spoke. Thursday morning, Colleen was buzzing with anticipation to meet Ryan. They had discussed meeting schedules at Starbucks the previous morning. Mondays were out due to Ryan's busy schedule, and Colleen avoided Fridays and weekends to not infringe on her time with David. They settled on Tuesdays and Thursdays at Ryan's condo. The meeting with her friends felt endless, and when it finally ended, she hurried out, making sure to obey the speed limit. She arrived at Ryan's unlocked condo, where he was waiting on the bed. They skipped foreplay and had another intense 3-hour session. Ryan's flexible schedule allowed them this time. Though she would never admit it, she found Ryan to be a better lover than David due to his experience with many women. Afterwards, Colleen checked her phone and, finding no messages, assumed David would be home at the usual time. She drove home, showered thoroughly, aware this would tip David off, but she had a plan. She dressed in her loungewear and waited for David, who arrived just before 7 p.m. Good evening, honey. Will you be eating my cooking tonight? She asked. I'm fine. I grabbed something on the way home, David replied. You know fast food is bad for you, she admonished. Yeah, well, I'll be in the office, he said dismissively. David, I'd like to talk to you when you have a few minutes, she requested. Okay, he agreed and went to his office, closing the door behind him. Colleen worked on the fundraiser, but realized David wasn't going to start the conversation. She went to the office and knocked. David, can we talk now? She asked. I suppose, he sighed. Colleen sat down across from him. Honey, I love you very much. I don't consider my new relationship to affect our marriage, but I understand you do. This is something I need and want. I hoped you'd be more understanding, but I'll be patient. I'll be here every evening and weekend, hoping we can move past this. If you ignore me, I'll accept that, but still be here, she explained. So you plan to keep seeing Ryan? He asked. Yes, wait, she started. Did you think I wouldn't find out his name? David interrupted. I thought you'd prefer not to know. Also, I apologize for the shower incident on Tuesday. I'll start showering every weekday afternoon to avoid tipping you off. I won't be meeting him that often, but it will keep things consistent, she said. And this is your final decision? Nothing I can do will change your mind, he asked, his voice tight. I'm sorry, David, but no, she confirmed. Well, I appreciate your honesty, even if it's not what I wanted to hear. Is that all? He asked, clearly pained. I love you, David. I hope you can separate my love for you from my physical need that Ryan fulfills, she said softly. David smiled wryly and nodded ruefully. Colleen waited to see if he had more to say, then quietly left, closing the door gently. She had been anxious about the conversation, but was proud she managed it well. She believed David would understand how important this was to her and how little it affected their life together. Colleen spent Friday evening and the weekend at home, only leaving for short errands. She invited David to join her, hoping to allay his fears, but he declined. They spoke as needed, with no hostility but also no affection. She knew he needed time to adjust. She tried to initiate lovemaking on Saturday night, but David deflected her attempts. She remained hopeful, believing it was just a matter of time. Monday morning, David left early. Colleen suspected this would continue for a while, but hoped things would eventually return to normal. Midday showers were inconvenient, but a small price to pay to soothe David's feelings. She met with her friends and listened to their stories about their young lovers, thinking about Ryan and feeling her temperature rise. Gail noticed. Are you all right, Colleen? You're getting a little red, Gail asked with concern. I'm fine, just a little warm, Colleen replied, taking a sip of water and trying to focus on the stories again. After another cold Monday night with David, Colleen prepared for her Tuesday with Ryan. He met her at the door in a robe that quickly fell to the floor, and they had a passionate session. After 90 minutes, they relaxed in each other's arms. "I know your husband is off limits, Colleen, but how are things at home? Do you feel in danger?" Ryan asked with genuine concern. "Thank you for your concern, Ryan, but David isn't like that. He's having trouble adjusting and seems distant. He denies avoiding me," Colleen explained. "So you're still talking?" "That's a good sign," Ryan noted. "In short phrases, only as necessary. I've assured him I love him and made sure I'm there for him. It'll take time for him to see you're no threat to our marriage," she said. They spent another hour in tender lovemaking before Colleen left. She showered and bathed thoroughly, then read her book while waiting for David. He came home at 7:36 p.m. "Hi, honey. How was work?" Colleen greeted him warmly. "It was fine," David replied curtly. "Would you like dinner tonight?" she offered. "I had a late lunch. I'm fine," he responded. "Anything you'd like to talk about?" she inquired gently. "No, I'll be in the office," he said, turning away. "Okay, I'll be here if you need or want me," she added coquettishly. "Duly noted." The door closed softly and Colleen was alone again. She wondered how much of his office time was actual work versus avoiding her. Determined to give him space, she read her book, confident she was doing the right thing. For the next several weeks, Colleen continued to meet Ryan every Tuesday and Thursday, enjoying amazing and intense sex. Evenings and weekends with David remained civil but distant. Colleen offered dinner every night, and David always declined, spending his evenings in the office. She read, worked on charity, watched TV, or browsed the internet. Despite the loneliness, she believed she could have both a loving husband and an attentive lover, giving her strength to endure the lonely moments. After 3 months, Colleen noticed a change in David. While his schedule remained the same, he was coming home in a better mood, albeit a little later. They started having dinner together a few nights a week and sometimes watched TV or read together. Although they hadn't resumed lovemaking, Colleen believed this change signaled a shift in David's attitude. However, after another 3 months without physical closeness, their relationship felt more like that of roommates or friends, and she missed their lovemaking. That evening, Colleen decided to address the issue directly. "David, I appreciate your understanding about Ryan. I know it hasn't been easy," she began. "Well, you didn't give me much choice, Colleen," David replied. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I'm concerned about our lack of sex life. We haven't made love since I started seeing Ryan, and I miss it." "When might we take the next step?" she asked. "I haven't told you this, but I have no intention of having sex with you," David said bluntly. "David, that's ridiculous. I always make sure I'm very clean for you. There's no reason for us not to have sex," Colleen protested. "You made a choice and forced it on me. I can make choices too," David retorted. He got up and went to bed, leaving Colleen stunned. She hadn't expected him to cut off sex. She thought having a lover might spur him on, but now she had to rethink her approach. Colleen decided to ramp up the pressure indirectly. She had kept her distance, hoping David would come around, but now she would turn up the teasing. She would become more physical, wear skimpy clothing to bed, or sleep unclothed. She was determined to make it hard for him to resist. However, her plan failed. For 2 months she tried to entice David, but he didn't respond. It had been 8 months since they last made love. While Ryan met her physical needs, she missed the emotional connection with David and became frustrated. After another month, she decided to make the most of whatever David offered. If he wanted a sexless relationship, so be it. She would express her love in other ways and take what he gave. This decision set them on a new path. On a warm Wednesday morning, Colleen parked her Lexus outside David's building, picked up her purse, signed in at the guard's desk, and made her way to the 7th floor. It had been a while since she'd been there during the day, and she had forgotten how busy the office was. Terry, David's longtime receptionist, noticed her as soon as she stepped off the elevator. "Mrs. Lynch, it's good to see you again. It's been a while since you visited," Terry greeted. "Hello, Terry. Is David in his office?" Colleen asked, already walking that way. "Yes, ma'am, but please wait. They're working with confidential documents this morning, so I need to announce you." Terry picked up the phone and called David's extension. "Mr. Lynch, your wife is here to see you," Terry said. Colleen couldn't hear the response, but soon the conversation ended. "He'll be a couple of minutes, Mrs. Lynch. He needs to secure some documents." Colleen nodded and looked around the office, noticing a mix of familiar and new faces. She noted Eileen's desk was empty, assuming she was in David's office. After a couple of minutes, David's door opened and a beautiful woman walked out. Shorter than Colleen, with long dark brown hair and a prominent chest, she looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s. Colleen disliked her instantly. "Mrs. Lynch, nice to meet you. I'm Alana. Come on back," Alana said, guiding Colleen down the familiar hallway. Alana lingered at the door as Colleen entered David's office. "Thank you, Alana. Take lunch now. We'll continue at 2 o'clock, David instructed. "Yes, sir," Alana responded and left, closing the door behind her. Colleen couldn't help but comment, "How does she manage not to tip over with those things?" David sighed. "I assume you didn't come here to insult my assistant." "What happened to Eileen?" Colleen asked. "She got promoted," David replied. "To what position?" Colleen continued. "Executive assistant. The job was getting too big for her and she needed to slow down. I created a position with less responsibility and no travel," David explained. "So that girl will be traveling with you?" Colleen inquired. "Yes, your jealousy is amusing and ironic, considering the circumstances." "Why are you here, Colleen?" David asked. "To take my husband to lunch," Colleen said firmly. "On a Wednesday?" David sounded surprised. "Yes, because I miss you, David. I wanted to spend time with you and show that I love you," she explained. "Fine. They opened a new Vietnamese place nearby. Let's go," David conceded. They walked mostly in silence, with a few comments on things they saw. Colleen held David's arm, and he didn't seem to mind. They were seated quickly, and the hostess greeted David by name, suggesting he was a regular. They talked about nothing in particular, and David suggested dishes for her to try. Colleen took his hand across the table, and he didn't pull away. "Do you believe I love you, David?" Colleen asked softly. "Love me? My kind of love doesn't allow for what you did, but your kind does." "At least you picked a decent guy," David responded, his tone tinged with sarcasm. "What do you mean? How do you know about Ryan?" Colleen was taken aback. "I had him investigated. I know you go to his condo every Tuesday and Thursday. I noticed you came today to not miss your time with him. But at least he's not a con man or a gold digger," David said coolly. "He's not like that," Colleen defended. Famous last words. "But you're right. He seems to be in it just for the Zex," David remarked. "David, let's change the subject. I came to spend time with you and talk about us," Colleen pleaded. "What us, Colleen? We're more like roommates than husband and wife. We haven't made love in nearly a year," David pointed out. "Your choice," Colleen interjected, and David smirked. "Yes, my choice. You chose to cheat on me. So, no Zex, and our time together is just watching TV or being in the same room. That's why I'm here today. I'm not happy with this, and I want to change it. I have no intention of giving up Ryan, but I want our time to be meaningful," Colleen explained earnestly. "That's what you don't get, Colleen. As long as you're seeing Ryan, this is the most it can be," David countered. "I don't accept that, David. Our marriage can be the same. My time with Ryan doesn't affect my time with you. I don't love him. It's just like spending time with friends," Colleen argued. "But it is different. I don't mind your time with friends because no one should revolve around one person, but I won't pretend nothing's happening while you're with another man. There were 2 people in our marriage. Now there are 3. It's not the same and never will be. Saying you don't love him and just use him for Zex makes it worse. What does that make him? A toy?" David questioned, his voice rising with frustration. By the end of his rant, David's voice had steadily grown louder, and Colleen's attempts to calm him were in vain. When he finished, he took out his wallet, placed a $50 bill on the table, and stormed out. Colleen quickly gathered her things, whispered apologies to those around her, oblivious to their disapproving looks, and hurried out of the restaurant. She glanced towards David's office, seeing him walking away in a hurry, knowing she couldn't catch up. So, she took her time and walked to her car. She struggled to hold back her tears until she got into the car, but once inside, she broke down crying. She couldn't understand why her relationship with Ryan was affecting her marriage. Joan and the other ladies had lovers and were still happily married. Why was it so difficult for her? She thought about discussing it with her friends, but decided against it for now. She didn't want them to think she had failed at something they managed so well. She went home and took her usual afternoon shower, not wanting David to think she had gone to Ryan for comfort. She hoped to continue the conversation calmly after David had cooled down, so she took some time to make herself presentable. The reality was that this issue had to be addressed. They couldn't continue as they had been. David came home late, around 9 p.m. He had the courtesy to let Colleen know he would be late, so she made herself dinner and did some light cleaning to keep busy while waiting for him. "David, can we talk, please?" Colleen asked as soon as he walked in. "I don't know what else there is to say, Colleen. You've had an affair despite my objections, and it's been going on for nearly a year. You think the problem is my objection, not the affair itself? We won't agree, so what's the point of talking again? David replied, his voice heavy with frustration. Yes, I understand that, but I still believe we could be more than what we are. We've been together for 25 years. Surely we can be more than this, Colleen pleaded. We are what we are because of your affair, Colleen. It doesn't make sense, David countered. David, Joan, Ellen, Gail, and Marge all have happy marriages with lovers on the side. Why can't we do the same? She argued. David silently laughed, then motioned for Colleen to sit down. I spoke to their husbands when this started, except Wendell. His affairs are well known, and everyone knows he cheated on Joan first. But I spoke to the others. About what? Colleen asked, confused. Initially, I hoped you'd get this out of your system. I let you go on your dates and even meet Ryan for your afternoon trysts a few times. But after the second time, you made it clear you planned to keep seeing him. So I sought advice from the happy husbands to see how they managed. If they accepted it, maybe they could offer pointers, David explained. Oh, David, that's sweet. Did they give any advice? Colleen asked hopefully. They did, and I've applied many of them, David said, watching Colleen's reaction. Colleen was confused, as she hadn't noticed any changes David had made to strengthen their marriage. Like what? She asked. Did you know that only Rick and Gail continued having sex once Gail took a lover? David began. What? Colleen exclaimed, shocked. Joan started her affair in response to Wendell's infidelity. When Wendell found out, he stopped being with her altogether. It didn't affect him much, David continued. I don't believe it. Joan always says they're happy, Colleen said, shaking her head. She's saving face, Colleen. They spend little time together only for public functions to appear happy. They have separate bedrooms and communicate via texts and emails, David explained. That can't be true, Colleen protested. Marge was next. She and Norm didn't have much of a marriage to begin with. Nothing bad, just indifferent. When Marge heard about Joan's affair, she did the same. Their marriage didn't improve, but they're still married, and Marge is happier, David added. But Marge always praises their marriage, Colleen said, still in disbelief. Probably like Joan. She wants everyone to think everything is great. Image is crucial for older, wealthy women, Colleen, David pointed out. But they're my friends. They'd be honest with me, Colleen insisted. David smiled at this. Gil was next. Rick said he tried to ignore it and continue as usual, but after a few months, it was clear she was bored with him. Ordinary married sex wasn't exciting after her thrilling affair with a younger man. They haven't been together since, David explained. I can't believe this. I can't believe my friends would lie about their marriages. The husbands must be trying to make the wives look bad, and I doubt the husbands are going without Zex, except Wendell, Colleen said, struggling to accept the truth. Oh, they're not going without. They have a simple solution to meet those needs, David replied. Oh, and what is that? Colleen asked, her curiosity piqued. They hired personal assistants, David said, watching Colleen's reaction. Colleen needed a moment to grasp what that meant. When she finally understood, the new girl David hired seemed unfazed by Colleen's reaction and had been expecting it. I hired Alana shortly after your speech. I was truthful about Eileen needing help in creating another position. Actually, I hired Alana for her business qualifications. She has a business degree and came highly recommended for her skills. For the first couple of months, everything was very professional between us, David said, ignoring his wife's jab. Her job requires us to spend a lot of time together, and we got to know each other well. After a couple of months, I opened up to her about what you were doing. It was such a relief to unburden myself. I felt like a weight had been lifted, David explained. That must have been when I noticed your mood improve, and to think I believed you were coming around, Colleen said, a touch of bitterness in her voice. After that, no topic was off limits. We shared almost everything about ourselves. We've become very close, David continued. When did you start sleeping with her? Colleen asked bluntly. Just a couple of months ago. Unlike you, I'm not the type to jump into bed with someone I met in a coffee shop, David replied, his tone sharp. Colleen winced at the insult. Things had been building for some time. We developed an easygoing relationship with lots of flirting and some innuendo. I was confident she was attracted to me by her actions, light touches, standing close, things like that. And I was certainly attracted to her. One night, we stayed late to finish a project. I didn't feel like going home, and she lives alone, so she had nowhere to be. I pulled out a couple of beers, and we drank and talked. We were right next to each other on the leather couch in my office, David recounted. Jesus, David, we did it on that couch, Colleen interjected, her voice rising. David just smiled. Okay, I think I've heard enough, Colleen said, trying to maintain her composure. Sorry. Anyway, that was the start. I figured if you could do it, so could I. But I always do it when you're busy. You purposely stayed late to do it, David added. Like I said, Colleen, we're basically roommates now. You made a choice, and I made mine, David stated matter-of-factly. It's not the same, David. My time with Ryan didn't interfere with my time with you. You can't say the same, Colleen argued. True, but the circumstances were different. You went outside the marriage first. I just responded. The truth is you were considerate since you were the first one. Despite my objection, I appreciate that. But frankly, I didn't think I owed you much consideration, David replied, his tone cold. Colleen was hurting. She couldn't get the image of her husband with Alana out of her mind. For the first time, she realized how her relationship with Ryan, despite the boundaries, affected David. She had assumed it would be out of sight, out of mind, but it wasn't. After a few minutes, David spoke again. There's something else I need to tell you, Colleen, David said quietly. What's that? She managed to whisper. Alana's pregnant, about 2 months, David revealed. Colleen's eyes widened and she gasped. As if things weren't bad enough, it just got worse. It's yours? She stammered. She assures me it is. I'll be making sure, David said firmly. Of course. How did this happen? Colleen asked, her voice trembling. David took a deep breath. It was intentional. Colleen's mind reeled from another blow. She wasn't sure how much more she could take, but she had to know everything. Now was the time to get it all out in the open, no matter how much it hurt. You got her pregnant on purpose, but why? She asked, trying to understand. I have a valuable company, Colleen, that we solely own. Currently, I have no one to leave it to. I had planned to sell the company eventually, but I dislike that idea now. My employees are like family, and I didn't want to leave their futures in the hands of a stranger or worse, a conglomerate. Now, depending on the timing, I plan to leave it to Alana or our baby, David explained. Are you divorcing me, David? Colleen asked, fear creeping into her voice. I'm not planning on it, at least not yet. I plan to keep things as they are. Alana wants to marry me and even paid for a prenup heavily in my favor, but she's also okay with things staying as they are, as long as we spend time together. So the status quo is you can keep seeing Ryan, and I'll have Alana, David said. This was Tia. Maybe she was naive, but Colleen never expected things to turn out this way. She stood up and picked up her purse and keys. David, I need some time to process all of this. I'm going to take a drive and might be very late. I'll keep in touch by text, so you won't worry, Colleen said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Colleen left the house and drove aimlessly through the city. How had things gone this far? Her husband had a lover who was young, beautiful, with a dark complexion and long, wavy dark brown hair. She assumed Alana was Hispanic but wasn't sure. She sent periodic texts to David, letting him know she was still driving, and his response was always the same, please be safe. It gave her some comfort that he still cared about her well-being. She finally arrived home around 2 a.m. and walked wearily into the house. David was asleep, but he had considerately left her bedside lamp on. She went into her closet, changed for bed, and found David awake and sitting up when she emerged. Are you all right, Colleen? David asked, concern evident in his voice. Yes, David, I'm fine, but I'm tired. Let's get some sleep and talk tomorrow, she replied. She climbed into bed and slept. They never got around to talking the next day, mostly because there wasn't much else to say. David went to work and Colleen met with her friends. She thought about canceling her afternoon with Ryan, but didn't, and in the end was glad she went through with it. He immediately noticed something was wrong, and instead of an afternoon of Zex, they talked. When they did have Zex, it was gentle and slow. The next few weeks passed quickly, with Colleen now aware of David's relationship with Alana. David stayed late at the office more often. While she understood, it still hurt Colleen's feelings, and she found herself feeling unwell, spending several evenings entirely in bed. She'd never had a sensitive stomach before, so she took this as a sign that the state of her marriage was deeply affecting her. She finally decided to see a doctor. Colleen Conyers-Lynch stepped off the elevator on the 7th floor of her husband's office building and headed straight for his office. Terry, the receptionist, tried to stop her, knowing that her boss and Alana were in there alone and potentially in a compromising position. Mrs. Lynch, wait, Terry called out. Colleen turned to Terry, whom she had always liked, and gave her a gentle smile. It's all right, Terry, I already know about them, but thank you for your kindness and concern. Terry could only watch as Colleen continued down the hallway to her husband's office. She entered without knocking, finding Alana on her husband's lap. The sound of the door drew their attention, and both heads turned in unison. Alana quickly jumped off his lap and ran into David's private restroom. "Colleen, what on earth are you doing here?" David demanded, shock and annoyance in his voice. "We need to talk, David," Colleen said, as Alana emerged from the restroom. "It couldn't have waited until tonight?" David asked, exasperated. "It could have, but I wanted to do it here since it concerns Alana as well. Shall we sit on the couch?" Colleen suggested. They all sat, with Colleen on one end, David on the other, and Alana perched on the armrest behind David. Colleen extended her arm, handing David a file folder. "What's this?" David asked, taking the folder. "I'm divorcing you," Colleen said calmly. The look on his face was priceless. Were it not for the seriousness of the situation and the pain she felt, she would have found it amusing. "You're divorcing me?" David repeated, incredulous. "Yes, David. I think you'll find the terms agreeable. I've not asked for any part of the company, though I added a little extra in the cash settlement to make up for it. But it's nothing you can't afford," Colleen explained. David glanced through the terms outlined in the filing and saw nothing objectionable. In fact, it was probably less than the court would have awarded her. The settlement wasn't the problem. The only question David had was why? Or rather, why now? "For a couple of reasons, David, but mostly because I love you," Colleen said softly. "You'll have to explain that," David said, his tone confused. "I've loved you since I first met you at Sheila Mullen's pool party when we were 17. We've been together for more than half our lives, almost 26 years. And I want you to be happy. I made a bad choice and damaged us beyond repair. So I'm setting you free to be happy with Alana and your new baby," Colleen explained. Colleen smiled at Alana as her face lit up with the news that she'd get to marry the man she loved. David was more shocked than anything else. "What about you, Colleen?" David asked, still trying to process everything. "Oh, your generosity will more than take care of me for the rest of my life. I'm embarking on a new period of my life, and I'm a little scared. It's exciting," Colleen replied. "Lots of women live alone, Colleen. I'm sure you'll be fine," David said dismissively. "Actually, that's not what I meant. I won't be alone for long. It seems I've gotten myself pregnant," Colleen revealed. David's jaw dropped, and Alana's eyes widened in surprise. The room fell silent as they absorbed the news. The folder of papers hit the floor with a thud as David looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife in shock. They'd never had kids together, preferring their freedom. They had enjoyed living child-free, but now, as their marriage was ending, they were each embarking on a new adventure. Parenthood. "It's Ryan's," Colleen clarified. Even as he said it, David realized what he implied since he hadn't had sex with his wife in months. It had to be Ryan's. Unless Colleen had another lover, he had no desire to hurt or insult her, and was relieved when she took the question in stride. "What kind of woman do you think I am?" Colleen asked with a lighthearted tone and a bit of a chuckle. "Oh, I guess we know the answer to that, don't we? Yes, it's Ryan's." "Are you two going to make a go of it?" David inquired. "Ryan is, and always will be, a bachelor. We would never work out, and I don't love him anyway. To his credit, he hasn't denied it and has been very agreeable about child support. I won't need the money, of course, but it's the principle. He's even said he plans to make an effort to be a good father, though he has doubts about his ability," Colleen explained. "You're keeping the baby," David stated. "Your generosity will allow me the freedom to raise my baby. Plus, I plan to have a full-time live-in nanny, which you will be indirectly paying for. That's why I wanted to keep the house," Colleen responded. "I did notice, which rather surprised me, but I wasn't going to argue. You know how much I love that house, and I want to raise my baby there. I think it'll be a good size for us and the nanny," Colleen added. "I think you're right. I must say, Colleen, I never expected this, but it makes sense." "Do your friends know?" David asked. "Oh, yes. We had a serious talk about their nonsense and lies. They felt bad for leading me down that path, but I assured them it was my choice. They finally admitted the truth, but I'm still the only one going for a divorce, so I guess that's a point in my favor. You know, if you ever need anything, you can call me," Colleen said. "I know, but it's time I stood on my own 2 feet. I went from Dad's house to college to your house. I promise I'll call if I need to, but I plan to do it myself," David assured her. With that, Colleen stood up, and David and Alana did the same. Colleen hugged them both, then turned and walked out the way she came.
It all started quite simply, not too long ago. My wife and I had been going through a rough patch in our relationship. You know how it is, small disagreements snowball into larger issues, and before you know it, tension fills the air. But there's something about Christmas, a time when people try to set aside their grievances and pretend everything is fine for the sake of family harmony. That was the plan for us as well. A week before the holiday, we agreed to keep things civil, no arguments, just peace. Later that same day, I overheard my wife talking on the phone. Apparently, she had made a bet with someone. Can you believe that? I didn't catch the full details of what the bet was about, and naturally, curiosity got the better of me. When I asked her about it directly, she brushed it off, saying she had made a silly wager with her friend about whether she could manage to accomplish something before Christmas. It's supposed to be a surprise for you, she added with a smile. But don't worry, I'll make sure it's worth the wait. With that, she walked off, leaving me with more questions than answers. Throughout the day, my wife spent an unusual amount of time on her phone, which only piqued my curiosity further. Then, out of the blue, she started getting ready to go out. She wasn't just throwing on her usual casual outfit, either. She dressed up, makeup, a nice coat, everything. Naturally, I asked where she was headed. To the store, she said. Just for 10 minutes, and then I'm meeting my friend. I need to pick up some things for Christmas dinner and make everything look perfect. Hopefully, we can avoid fighting even for this one day. Given how tense things had been recently, I decided not to push it. She went on to explain that after the shopping trip, her friend would be taking some photos of her in the snow for Instagram. It'll be quick, she promised. Just a little outing, and I'll be back in an hour. Meanwhile, you have an important task, cleaning the house. Can you handle that? I agreed without hesitation. It seemed straightforward enough, and I figured it might help keep things smooth between us. After she left, I called my best friend, Danny, to help me with the cleaning and to keep me company. Danny is a talker, he loves to share every detail of his life. Within minutes, he was recounting yet another disastrous Tinder date. If you've ever met someone like Danny, you'll know what I mean when I say that his stories can test your patience. Still, it was a distraction from scrubbing floors and dusting shelves, so I let him ramble on. As time passed, I couldn't help but notice that my wife had been gone for over an hour. When I checked the fridge, I realized we were out of milk, so I decided to text her. No response. That's when I started to wonder what was taking so long. 2 hours later, she finally returned home, her coat dusted with snow and her arms full of shopping bags. I started unloading the groceries and quickly noticed something odd. The bags didn't contain half the items she had planned to buy. Stranger still, I caught a faint whiff of men's cologne on her. It wasn't overpowering, but it was noticeable enough to make me pause. I decided to approach the situation calmly. Why did you say you'd be gone for an hour and end up taking 2? I asked. She sighed and explained that the store had been packed with people, with long lines at every register. On top of that, her friend had been late. To prove her point, she played me a voice message from her friend, who was frantically complaining about not being able to find the right outfit for their snowy photo session. It all sounded plausible. Okay, but why didn't you get everything on your list? I pressed further. She rolled her eyes and explained that the shelves were practically empty. You wouldn't believe how chaotic it was, she said. I almost got into a fight with an older woman over the last bottle of champagne. To back up her story, she pulled out her phone and showed me a video her friend had recorded. In it, my wife could be seen squaring off with the woman, jokingly suggesting they settle the matter with a snowball fight. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. But there was still the matter of the cologne. One last thing, I said. Why do you smell like men's cologne? She seemed genuinely puzzled for a moment before explaining. Apparently, she had been trying to reach a pineapple on a high shelf when a man had offered to help. He must have just bathed in that stuff, she said with a shrug. I probably brushed against him while he was handing it to me. Nothing sinister, I promise. As if to change the subject, she showed me the photos her friend had taken. They were harmless enough, playful shots of her tossing snow and smiling against a wintry backdrop. She pointed out the details in the pictures, commenting on how beautiful the snowfall had been and how they managed to capture the light just perfectly. It all seemed innocent, even if I still found the timing odd. I decided not to press further for the sake of maintaining peace. We still had a lot to prepare for Christmas, and the last thing I wanted was another argument. "All right," I said finally. "Let's unpack these groceries." As we put everything away, she started talking about her plans for decorating the house. She had bought a new set of Christmas lights and was eager to string them up around the living room. I nodded along, trying to focus on the tasks at hand. Danny, who had been quietly listening up until now, chimed in with his own stories about Christmas traditions, steering the conversation away from anything potentially tense. It helped lighten the mood considerably. The tension from earlier had eased, and for now, we returned to the task at hand, focusing on preparing for Christmas. By the time we were done unpacking, the house felt warmer, more festive, as if the small cloud of suspicion had lifted. For the moment, everything seemed back to normal, and I decided to let the day end on a good note. A little more time passed, and I decided it was time to go pick up my wife's Christmas gift. She had mentioned she wanted us to exchange something meaningful this year, and I'd had the perfect idea for a while, a custom ring with her name engraved on it. She'd once said how cool it would be to have matching rings, so in a way, it was a gift for both of us. It had taken weeks to be made, but when I finally saw it, it was perfect, exactly as I'd imagined. As I prepared to leave, my wife mentioned she'd be heading out as well. We had 2 cars, so that wasn't an issue. However, she insisted on taking a different route. "No peeking at what I'm up to," she joked. I didn't mind. If anything, her excitement about Christmas made me feel more relaxed. I paid for the ring, picked it up, and drove home feeling pretty pleased with myself. When I got there, though, she still wasn't back. I texted her to say I'd gotten her gift. She replied almost instantly, saying she was thrilled but needed more time because her gift for me wasn't going to be something simple like socks. "You're going to love it. You have no idea what it is," she added. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I decided to relax for a bit, firing up the PlayStation to play basketball with the guys online. The game went on for a while, and still, there was no sign of her. Just as I started to feel a bit uneasy, my phone buzzed. It was her, saying she was on her way home. I wrapped up the game and decided to make coffee for her arrival. About 30 minutes later, I heard the front door open. She walked in carrying a sizable wrap box. "Wow, that's impressive," I said, eyeing the box. "Don't even think about opening it before Christmas," she warned with a smile. "Don't worry," I replied. "I'm not a kid." She laughed. "Sure you're not." Then she paused, rubbing her shoulders. "Hey, could you grab my bag from the car? I'm so tired I just need to sit down for a minute." "Of course," I said, grabbing my coat and boots. Outside, the air was crisp, and I found her bag sitting in the passenger seat. As I reached for it, I caught a faint but unusual smell. Curious, I looked around and spotted a crumpled receipt. It read 2 pumpkin lattes. That was odd. Why would she have stopped for coffee, and who had she shared it with? I carried the bag inside and handed it to her. "Here you go," I said casually. "By the way, why were you gone so long?" "Oh, it's a bit of a story," she began. "I didn't want to get you something generic, so I drove all the way to this specialty gift shop on the other side of town. My friend recommended it, and you wouldn't believe how amazing it is. It's like a mini AliExpress in real life, with all these unique items. Look, I even recorded some videos to show you how cool it is." She pulled out her phone and played a video. In it, she was browsing through shelves filled with quirky, colorful items, narrating her excitement. "See? You'd have loved this place," she said. It did look interesting, but I couldn't shake the question in my mind. "Okay, but what's with the receipt for 2 pumpkin lattes?" I asked. She looked surprised for a moment but quickly smiled. Oh, that. The sales lady was so helpful, she stayed late past her break to help me pick the perfect gift. So, as a thank you, I treated her to coffee at a nearby cafe. We ended up chatting about husbands, Christmas, and life in general. It was nice, and she even followed me on Instagram. Look, here's her profile, she said, showing me the screen. That's thoughtful of you, I said, feeling satisfied with her explanation. Anything else I should know? Oh, definitely, she replied with a grin. She also gave me this car air freshener with a vanilla scent. You just put a few drops in the vent, and it smells amazing, perfect for the holidays. That does sound nice, I said, nodding. By the way, your gift is already under the tree. You'll get to open it on Christmas Day. She leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, and said, That's perfect. I can't wait. As the afternoon stretched on, we decided to take a break and relax with a movie. She picked out a Christmas classic, and we curled up on the couch with warm mugs of cocoa. It felt like the perfect way to wind down after a busy day, letting the holiday atmosphere fill the room. We shared laughs at the funny scenes and commented on how movies like this never get old. This is going to be our best Christmas yet, she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. I think you're right, I replied, wrapping my arm around her. The simplicity of the moment reminded me why I cherished her so much. It wasn't about the big gestures or expensive gifts, it was moments like these, where we could just be together, that made everything special. As the sun began to set, she turned to me with a sly grin. So, do you think you'll be able to wait until Christmas to open my gift? I'll try my best, I said, laughing. But if it's as good as you say, it'll be tough. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. As I sat there, I thought about how much effort she'd put into making this holiday special. Whatever was in that big box, I knew it would be something she'd chosen with care. For now, though, I decided to let the mystery wait. Christmas morning would be here soon enough, and I had a feeling it would be one to remember. I think everyone has that one friend who knows how to ruin a perfectly good moment, right? For me, that friend is Jacob. Just as I had settled into my chair to relax, Jacob called. Hey guys, he said, sounding unusually cheery. So, my relatives are coming in from out of town, and I just realized my house is completely undecorated for Christmas. What do you think about coming over to help? I'd really appreciate it. I muted the microphone on my phone and turned to my wife. We've got a situation. Jacob's house is still bare, and he's asking for help with decorations. Should we go? She thought for a moment and then said, Sure, why not? But wait a second. Oh, no. We forgot about something. Her face lit up in realization. Remember the neighbors? They left their dog with us before going to Thailand. They asked us to take care of him, and we haven't walked him today. She was right. The neighbor's dog was quite independent and didn't need constant attention, but we had agreed to check in, top up his food, and take him out for a walk every day. In the chaos of the day, we'd completely forgotten. How about this, she suggested. You go help Jacob, and I'll take care of the dog. Does that work? Sure, no problem, I said. I grabbed my coat, got into the car, and headed to Jacob's place. When I arrived, he greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, going on about how busy he'd been and how grateful he was for the help. Man, I don't know what I was thinking, leaving everything to the last minute, he admitted. We got to work immediately. The house was a mess, with boxes of decorations scattered everywhere. It took us a good while just to sort through them and figure out where to start. There were tangled strings of lights, garlands stuffed into bags, and ornaments still wrapped in tissue paper from the year before. As we hung garlands, strung lights, and arranged ornaments, a few more friends showed up to lend a hand. Despite the chaos, there was something satisfying about transforming the house into a festive wonderland. Jacob was his usual talkative self, going on about his relatives and how they'd react when they saw the decorations. You know, my aunt loves Christmas trees, he said, pointing to a corner where the tree would go. But if it's not perfectly symmetrical, she'll let me hear about it for weeks. We all laughed, but we knew he wasn't joking. About an hour into the decorating, my phone buzzed. It was my wife. Her voice sounded tense as she said, "Hey, I can't make it to help. Something came up. Everything's fine, but I'll explain when I get home." "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. "Yeah, I'm fine. Don't worry. I'll tell you everything later," she said. I decided not to press her further and focused on the task at hand. With the extra hands, we managed to finish decorating Jacob's house in a couple of hours. It looked fantastic, like something out of a holiday movie. We had put up a tree adorned with colorful ornaments, lights twinkled along the walls, and garlands hung from the banisters. Jacob, being the generous guy he is, handed me a bottle of expensive whiskey as a thank you gift. I accepted it gladly, packed up, and headed home. When I got back, my wife was already there. She'd brought the neighbor's dog back inside and was sitting on the couch with a serious expression on her face. I asked her what had happened. "You won't believe this," she began. "While I was walking the dog, I ran into an old friend in the park. We started talking, and then she just broke down crying. Turns out she's having major family issues. Her parents got into a huge fight right before Christmas, and she's struggling to figure out how to bring them back together. I felt so bad for her that I ended up crying too. But she's doing a bit better now, and she even gave me some cake to take home." She gestured toward the kitchen. "I brought a couple of slices for us." "That's really thoughtful of her," I said. "Did you invite her over?" "I thought about it," she said, "but I remembered this is our Christmas. I wanted to keep it just for us." She paused, then brightened up. "Oh, and you have to see the photos I took of the dog playing in the snow. He was having the best time ever." My wife loved taking pictures, and this was no exception. She showed me a series of shots of the dog rolling around, jumping, and burying his nose in the snow. They were adorable, and her excitement was contagious. We spent a few minutes scrolling through the photos, laughing at the dog's antics. She described how the dog had found a pile of fresh snow and acted like it was the greatest thing in the world, diving into it face first and wagging his tail like crazy. Still, as the evening wound down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the day had been unusually eventful. Between Jacob's last-minute decoration panic, my wife's unexpected encounter in the park, and everything else that had happened, it felt like we'd crammed a week's worth of activity into a single day. Every time I thought about how the day had started so simply, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had happened. And believe me, you won't believe what happened next. The morning of Christmas arrived, and my wife woke me up with a bright smile on her face. "Hey, let's save opening our gifts for tonight when it's just the two of us," she said. Still half asleep, I nodded, not entirely sure what she was planning. Then she added, "Don't forget, we have a very important task to do today." I blinked a few times, trying to process what she was talking about. "What task?" I mumbled, my brain not quite awake yet. "We need to deliver the gifts to our friends," she reminded me. Suddenly, it clicked. Every year, we gave small presents to our close friends and made a point of dropping them off on Christmas morning. "Ah, right. I almost forgot," I said, shaking off the last remnants of sleep. My wife immediately started getting ready, heading to the bathroom to do her makeup. I, on the other hand, saw no point in going to such lengths. "Why are you getting all dolled up?" I asked. "Because I'm doing it for you," she replied, teasingly. "Later tonight, we'll be spending time together, just the two of us. Don't you want me to look my best?" I chuckled and said, "Fair enough. Do what you've got to do." Still, I decided to freshen up myself. I trimmed my beard, put on a festive shirt, and dabbed on some cologne. By the time I was done, she was nearly finished as well, running around the house in a flurry of activity, trying to find the perfect dress for the occasion. When she finally settled on a gorgeous outfit, we loaded the car with the pile of wrapped gifts we'd prepared and headed out. The morning air was crisp but not too cold, and the streets were quiet, the kind of calm you only experience on Christmas morning. Our first few stops went smoothly. We would knock on the door, exchange warm greetings, hand over the gifts, and stay just long enough to spread some cheer before heading to the next house. Everyone was so welcoming, and the joy in their faces made the effort of delivering the gifts worth it. As we made our rounds, my wife's cheerful energy was contagious. She kept chatting about how happy she was to see everyone so excited. "It's moments like these that make Christmas special," she said, and I couldn't agree more. Finally, we arrived at our last stop. This visit was to close friends of ours who always hosted big gatherings. Sure enough, their house was already buzzing with activity. Relatives, friends, and neighbors filled every room, and the sound of laughter and holiday music spilled out into the street. As we stepped out of the car, my wife suddenly gasped. "Oh no! I forgot the gift in the car." I followed her inside while she went back to retrieve it. The moment I entered, I was greeted by our friend and his girlfriend, who ushered me into the living room. Come in, come in." "You can't just leave without saying hello to everyone," they insisted. Reluctantly, I let myself be pulled into conversations with various guests. My wife soon joined me with the gift, but before I could hand it over, she whispered, "I'll take care of this. You mingle and show your handsome face to the crowd." With that, she disappeared upstairs with the gift and our friend's girlfriend. Meanwhile, I stayed downstairs, chatting with people I hadn't seen in ages. The atmosphere was infectious, and before long, I found myself laughing harder than I had in months. I almost lost track of time, but eventually, I realized my wife was still upstairs. Just as I began to wonder what was taking so long, she came back down with our friends, all three of them grinning from ear to ear. "Mission accomplished," she announced. "Those Kigurumi costumes, we got them, are a perfect fit." The joy in her voice was evident, and it was clear the gift had been a hit. We stayed for a little while longer, joining in the conversations and laughter. The topics ranged from funny holiday mishaps to more serious discussions, including one particular story that caught everyone's attention. One of the guests shared a shocking tale about a couple they knew who had such a massive fight that the wife had cheated on her husband right on Christmas Day. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone processed the gravity of the situation. "That's absolutely awful," my wife said, shaking her head in disbelief. "No one deserves to go through that, especially not during the holidays. I hope they find a way to work through it, but honestly, only God can judge them." I nodded in agreement, appreciating her empathy but also wanting to steer the conversation back to lighter topics. Shortly after, we said our goodbyes and headed back to the car. As we drove home, the car was filled with a comfortable silence for a few minutes before I decided to ask something that had been on my mind. "So, what was that bet with your friend about?" My wife squirmed in her seat a little, as if trying to find the right words. "Oh, that," she said, laughing nervously. "Well, you see, it's exactly what you've been experiencing these past 2 days." When I told her all the things we planned to do for Christmas, she said there was no way I'd be able to pull it all off. So, naturally, I bet her I could. I raised an eyebrow. "And all the secrecy? That was just to mess with me?" She grinned mischievously. "Pretty much. I thought it'd be fun to see how you'd react. But honestly, you handled it way better than I expected. You didn't even seem fazed." I chuckled, shaking my head. I'll admit, I was expecting something a little more dramatic, but okay. Fair enough. With that, we pulled into our driveway. I said I was expecting something else, of course, but all right. And with that, we went inside. Finally, it was just the two of us. After the long and busy day, my wife and I exchanged our gifts and settled down with some drinks to enjoy each other's company. The warm glow of the Christmas lights filled the room, and the sound of soft holiday music played in the background. It felt like the perfect moment. Perhaps as you listen to this, you're wondering when the real story begins. Let me tell you, it started on that very night. As the evening went on, my wife drank a bit more than usual. She laughed, joked, and eventually drifted off to sleep, resting her head on my shoulder. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, until her phone vibrated with a notification. The screen lit up, and I couldn't help but notice the message, "Check our secret chat about the bet." The words immediately caught my attention. I didn't react at first, letting the phone sit on the table. But a few minutes later, the message disappeared, leaving nothing but my growing suspicion. If the bet was as meaningless as she'd claimed, why would they need a secret chat? And why delete the message? An old memory came back to me. I had once known the password to her phone but had never had a reason to use it. Tonight, for the first time, I felt compelled. I carefully shifted her off my shoulder, laying her down on the couch, and picked up her phone. Quietly, I stepped into the bathroom and locked the door. With the phone in hand, I hesitated. A part of me didn't want to know what I might find, but another part knew I had to. I unlocked her phone and started scrolling through her messages. It didn't take long to find a link to a secret chat, a browser-based group conversation. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside the chat, I found messages between my wife, her friend, and a few others. At first, the conversation seemed innocent enough, until I scrolled further. That's when I saw the real topic of their discussion, their bet. And it wasn't about completing errands or holiday tasks as she had led me to believe. The bet was about whether my wife could cheat on me 4 times during Christmas. I was stunned. My stomach churned as I continued to read. The messages were explicit and detailed. Her friend, who was also married, had made the same bet with her husband. The two of them had turned their marriages into a game, comparing notes and sharing stories about how they had managed to deceive their spouses. My wife wasn't just participating, she was fully involved. The more I read, the angrier I became. The first incident was during her supposed trip to the grocery store. It turned out her elaborate excuses had been carefully planned. She had cheated on me with an acquaintance who worked at the store, right in the storage room. Her carefully rehearsed stories about lines and chaos at the store were nothing but lies. The second incident occurred during her so-called gift shopping trip. She had claimed to travel across town to buy something special, but instead, she had visited her ex-boyfriend. According to the chat, she had told him that she was already divorced from me. They'd spent hours together, and she had slept with him. I couldn't believe how easily she had fabricated an excuse and made me believe it. The third incident was when she had offered to walk the neighbor's dog. While I was decorating Jacob's house, she had taken the dog to a neighbor who lived on the other side of the park. There had been no friend in the park and no emotional encounter. Instead, she had cheated on me again, this time with that neighbor. The cake she brought home? It had come from him. The final betrayal happened earlier that very day. When she went upstairs to deliver the gift, she had involved herself in a love triangle with my friend and his girlfriend. The thought of it made me feel physically sick. How could she smile and act as if nothing had happened? I took screenshots of every message, saving the evidence to my phone. My hands shook as I went through each detail. I needed to know everything, no matter how painful it was. Her actions were beyond anything I could have imagined, and her friend was equally guilty. Together, they had turned what should have been a season of love and warmth into something vile and despicable. Once I had all the proof, I put her phone back and returned to the living room. She was still sleeping soundly, completely unaware of what I had just discovered. I sat down, staring at the twinkling Christmas lights, and let my thoughts race. Rage, betrayal, and disbelief all flooded through me. I knew one thing for certain, I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to ensure that everyone involved paid for what they had done. My wife's betrayal wasn't just a personal attack on me, it was a calculated series of actions that showed complete disregard for our marriage and everything we had built together. The others who had helped her, whether directly or indirectly, weren't going to escape accountability either. Her friend, her ex-boyfriend, the neighbor, even my so-called friend, they were all going to feel the consequences of their actions. With the evidence in hand and a plan forming in my mind, I resolved to take action. I wasn't going to let this be just another story of infidelity. It was time to prepare, to strategize, and to ensure that they all faced the fallout of their choices. I will prepare to destroy not only my wife's life but also the lives of everyone who helped her in this. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. I explained that I wanted to secretly file for divorce. My goal was to ensure my wife never saw it coming until everything was finalized. To buy some time, I told her that the gift she'd received wasn't the main one and that another, more special gift would be arriving later. Her face lit up with excitement, and she said she couldn't wait to see it. I promised to let her know when it was ready and added that I needed to refuel the car, giving me an excuse to leave the house. As soon as I was in the car, I called the husband of my wife's friend, the one who had initiated the bet. I explained everything I had discovered, including the messages and the details of their affair. I made sure to tell him not to mention that the information had come from me. I've still got my own plans to handle my wife, I said. He assured me he'd take care of his own situation and thanked me for letting him know. Next on my list was the man from the supermarket. It didn't take much effort to get him fired. I simply called the store's management and reported that inappropriate behavior had taken place in the storage room on the day in question. I suggested they check the security footage for confirmation. A few hours later, I received a call back. The manager informed me that the man had been terminated. Hearing that brought me a sense of satisfaction, one less person to escape the consequences of their actions. Then there was the neighbor. This one required a more calculated approach. We had spoken casually in the past, and I knew he had a wife and 2 kids. I also knew he was involved in some questionable activities, including buying firearms at suspiciously low prices. My first move was to send his wife all the incriminating messages. She called me almost immediately, thanking me profusely and saying she had suspected something for a while but hadn't been able to prove it. My second move was to anonymously report his illegal activities to the authorities. I filed a detailed complaint, including everything I knew about his shady purchases. It would take some time, but I was confident it would create serious problems for him down the line. After dealing with the neighbor, I turned my attention to my wife's ex-boyfriend. I hadn't heard much about him in years, so I did some digging on social media. It didn't take long to find his Instagram profile, where he had several pictures with a woman who appeared to be his fiancée. Curious, I clicked on her account and saw a story about their upcoming wedding preparations. The hypocrisy was staggering. This man, who was about to get married, had spent a day with my wife under the guise of buying a wedding suit and had used that opportunity to cheat on his fiancée. I decided to send her all the screenshots of their messages. Her response was immediate. She thanked me for exposing the truth and shared her side of the story. She confirmed that he had told her he was going suit shopping but now realized he'd used the time to sleep with my wife. In the end, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Not only had I uncovered his deceit, but I had also prevented another marriage built on lies. As the day unfolded, I found myself reflecting on how each person involved had made choices that showed complete disregard for the people they claimed to care about. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about revealing the truth and holding everyone accountable for their actions. Finally, I turned my attention to my so-called friend and his girlfriend. This situation was trickier because they had both been complicit in the betrayal. However, I knew that his family was deeply conservative and extremely religious. I still had his father's number from when I had helped them with a home renovation project. I decided to call him and send him the evidence of their involvement. The reaction was swift and brutal. His father's voice trembled with a mix of anger and disappointment as he said, "Now, I can no longer call him my son." Those words told me everything I needed to know. The fallout in their family would be immense, and I felt no sympathy for the chaos my so-called friend had brought upon himself. When I returned home, my wife was visibly shaken. She was trying to maintain her composure, but it was clear that the events of the day had left her rattled. She could sense that the people she had been involved with were facing serious consequences, and it was only a matter of time before her own actions caught up with her. Her hands trembled slightly as she went about her usual routines, avoiding eye contact with me as much as possible. The air was thick with tension, and I could tell she was on edge, waiting for the moment when everything would come crashing down. She knew her turn was coming, but she had no idea when or how. As the evening progressed, I decided to push the boundaries a little further to see just how nervous she was. I casually mentioned that I'd had an interesting day and had run into a few people who seemed oddly flustered. Her reaction was immediate. Her face paled slightly, and she stammered out a vague response about how people can be unpredictable during the holidays. "It's funny, isn't it?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "How some people's secrets always seem to come out at the worst possible times?" She nodded quickly, trying to change the subject, but her unease was impossible to miss. I continued to play my role, acting as though nothing was out of the ordinary. Let her stew in her anxiety, I thought. She deserved every second of it. But I wouldn't confront her just yet. Not until the divorce papers were ready. Only then would I deliver the final blow and watch her world crumble around her. Every interaction between us became a silent battle. She would try to gauge how much I knew, while I carefully concealed my knowledge, letting her spiral further into paranoia. She started checking her phone more frequently, almost as if expecting bad news to arrive at any moment. I caught her glancing at me nervously more than once, her hands fidgeting as she tried to keep up appearances. Meanwhile, I was meticulously documenting every step of my plan, ensuring that when the time came, I would have irrefutable proof to back up my actions. The screenshots, the messages, the details of every lie she had told, all of it was carefully organized and stored. I wasn't just preparing for a confrontation, I was preparing to dismantle the facade she had built. The weight of her own guilt was starting to show. She began to make small mistakes, forgetting things she usually remembered, misplacing items around the house, and even snapping at me over trivial matters. It was as if the walls were closing in on her, and she knew there was no escape. But I wasn't ready to end the game just yet. Let her know that the end was near, but let her wait in uncertainty. That was the least she deserved for what she had done. And so, I waited, keeping my composure and maintaining the charade, knowing that her reckoning was only a matter of time. When my lawyer finally called and told me that the divorce papers were ready, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. It was time to bring this chapter to a close. I placed the documents in a box, carefully wrapped it as if it were the most thoughtful gift, and prepared myself for the confrontation. As I drove home, I rehearsed what I would say, but nothing felt quite right. In the end, I decided to keep it simple. When I walked through the door, my wife greeted me with her usual cheerful demeanor, but I could see the nervousness behind her eyes. She had been walking on eggshells for days, clearly aware that the world around her was crumbling. I handed her the gift box with a wide smile and told her how much I loved her. Her face lit up, though her hands trembled slightly as she took the package. "What's this?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Just a little something special for you," I replied, keeping my tone light. I gestured for her to open it, and she eagerly tore off the wrapping paper. As soon as she saw the contents, her expression shifted from excitement to horror. Her face turned pale, and she clutched the documents as if they were burning her hands. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by her sudden outburst. "Please, no. I'm begging you." "I don't want to be next," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. Tears streamed down her face as she collapsed onto her knees, pleading for me to reconsider. But her words didn't move me. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. Her actions had destroyed our marriage, and there was no coming back from that. She continued to cry, repeating over and over how sorry she was, but all I could think about was the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, the utter lack of respect for what we had built together. "You knew what you were doing," I said coldly. "You knew every step of the way, and you still went through with it. Now, you're just facing the consequences." Her sobs grew louder as I began gathering her belongings. I didn't care about the mess or the chaos. I stuffed her clothes into suitcases, plastic bags, whatever I could find, and tossed them out onto the front lawn. Her cries grew more frantic with every trip I made back and forth from the house. "Please, stop. Let's talk about this," she begged, clinging to the doorframe as I made another trip. "We're done talking," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. Go stay with your mother. You're not welcome here anymore. Eventually, she realized that her pleas were falling on deaf ears. She grabbed her things and stumbled to her car, still sobbing uncontrollably. As she drove away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in days, the house was quiet. The tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud was finally gone. The next time I saw her was in court. The divorce process was grueling, endless paperwork, heated arguments, and constant back and forth between lawyers. She fought hard, trying to salvage whatever she could, but the evidence was stacked against her. I had every message, every photo, every detail of her infidelity. It was undeniable, and the judge saw that. The proceedings dragged on for months, each hearing more exhausting than the last. But in the end, justice prevailed. The divorce was finalized in my favor, and she left the courtroom defeated. I walked out feeling lighter, as though a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. With the legal battle behind me, I decided it was time to make a fresh start. The first thing I did was change the locks on the house. I wanted no lingering traces of her in my life. Then, I took some much-needed time off work and headed to visit my family. When I arrived, they welcomed me with open arms, offering the kind of warmth and support I hadn't felt in months. It was exactly what I needed. I invited a few close friends as well, and together we celebrated Christmas properly. We laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed each other's company without the shadow of betrayal looming over us. As I sat by the fireplace, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I couldn't help but reflect on how drastically my life had changed in just a few days. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a turning point. It forced me to confront the truth and take control of my own happiness. Meanwhile, my ex-wife's life had taken a very different turn. The fallout from her actions had been swift and severe. Her friendships were in shambles, her reputation was tarnished, and she was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had destroyed with her own choices. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I couldn't deny the sense of justice it brought. She had played a dangerous game and lost. Now, it was time for me to move forward and leave her behind. Christmas that year marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It was a reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to value the people who truly deserve your love and trust. Surrounded by family and friends, I finally felt at peace, ready to embrace whatever the future held. As for my ex-wife, she was no longer my concern. Her actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could, and I had no intention of letting her back into my life. The road ahead was mine to walk, free from the shadows of betrayal and deceit. And with every step, I felt stronger, more confident, and more determined to build a life that was truly worth living.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. Now let's begin this one. Ezra Blackwood's head felt like it was splitting in two. The harsh fluorescent light stabbed at his eyes as he struggled to focus on his surroundings. White walls, the antiseptic smell, a rhythmic beeping. Hospital. But why? He tried to piece together his fragmented memories. There had been a business trip, a last-minute flight to Chicago, the Hyatt Regency. He'd gotten back early, wanting to surprise Vivian. The sharp click of heels on linoleum snapped him back to the present. Vivian, his wife of 10 years, stood in the doorway, perfectly put together as always in her Chanel suit. Her manicured nails fidgeted with the strap of her Hermes bag. "I'm sorry you caught me with my lover in that hotel room," she said, her voice lacking any real remorse. "He didn't mean to knock you out cold, I swear. Please don't press charges." Ezra stared at her, rage building inside him like magma in a volcano. 10 years of marriage, a decade of shared dreams, struggles, triumphs. All of it a lie. "I'll destroy you both without the law," he replied, his voice hoarse but filled with icy determination. Vivian's concerned facade crumbled, replaced by a smirk that made Ezra's blood boil. She chuckled, the sound grating on his nerves. "Oh, honey, You'll be paying me alimony for the rest of your miserable life." As she turned to leave, something caught Ezra's eye. An emerald pendant hung around her neck, glinting in the harsh hospital lighting. He didn't recognize it. It certainly wasn't a family heirloom he would have known. A gift from her lover, no doubt. Another betrayal to add to the growing list. Before he could demand answers, a nurse bustled into the room. "Mr. Blackwood, you have another visitor. Your sister, Lydia?" Ezra's brow furrowed. He hadn't spoken to Lydia in years. What the hell was she doing here? The nurse ushered in a woman who bore little resemblance to the carefree girl Ezra remembered. Lydia Blackwood, now 35, carried herself with the wary confidence of someone who had seen too much of the world's darkness. Her sharp eyes took in every detail of the room before settling on her brother. "Hello, Ezra," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's been a while." Ezra nodded, unsure how to respond. The last time they'd spoken had been at their father's funeral 10 years ago. James Blackwood's death in a car accident had shattered their family. Ezra had thrown himself into his legal career, determined to make his father proud. Lydia had chosen a different path. "I heard about what happened," Lydia continued, perching on the edge of a plastic chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Ezra growled. "What are you doing here, Lydia? Last I heard, you were chasing conspiracy theories halfway around the world." Lydia's eyes flashed with irritation. "I'm an investigative journalist, Ezra, and those conspiracy theories have uncovered some very real, very dangerous truths." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I've been investigating a series of corporate cover-ups. I think they're connected to Dad's death." Ezra scoffed. "Dad died in a car accident, Lydia. It was tragic, but it wasn't some grand conspiracy. Was it?" Lydia challenged. "Have you ever looked into the circumstances? The brake failure, the convenient lack of witnesses." Ezra opened his mouth to argue, but Lydia pressed on. "I've uncovered links to a company called Nexichem. They're at the center of this whole mess." Nexichem. The name sent a chill down Ezra's spine. It was one of his firm's biggest clients. He'd personally handled several of their environmental compliance cases. "What do you know about Nexichem?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lydia's eyes narrowed. "More than I can safely share right now. But I think they're involved in something big, Ezra. Something deadly." Before Ezra could respond, he heard hushed voices outside his room. He recognized Vivian's voice, along with a man's he didn't know. The words Nexichem and silencing drifted through the partially open door. Lydia tensed, clearly having heard the same thing. "We can't talk here," she whispered. "It's not safe." As if on cue, a man appeared in the doorway. Felix Reeves, Ezra's longtime friend and a private investigator, surveyed the room with a practiced eye. "Ready to blow this popsicle stand?" Felix asked, his casual tone belying the concern in his eyes. "I've got a car waiting." Ezra nodded, suddenly eager to be anywhere but here. As Felix helped him out of bed, Lydia gathered his belongings. "We'll go to my place," she said quietly. "We have a lot to discuss." Felix's car wound through the city streets, the tension in the vehicle palpable. Ezra's mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened. His perfect life had shattered in an instant, and now his estranged sister was talking about conspiracies and cover-ups. They pulled up to a nondescript apartment building. Lydia led them up 3 flights of stairs, constantly checking over her shoulder. She unlocked a heavy door and ushered them inside. The apartment was small but neat, filled with stacks of papers and multiple computer screens. A young woman with bright blue hair looked up from one of the computers, her eyes widening at the sight of the newcomers. "Ezra, Felix, this is my roommate, Zara Chun," Lydia said. "Zara, this is my brother Ezra and his friend Felix." Zara nodded curtly, her gaze lingering on Ezra. "The corporate lawyer," she said, her tone making it clear that wasn't a compliment. Ezra bristled. "Environmental law. Actually, I specialize in helping companies comply with regulations and clean up contaminated sites." Something in Zara's expression shifted. Really? That's not what I expected. Before Ezra could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw it was Harold Winters, his law firm partner. With a sigh, he answered, "Ezra, where the hell are you?" Harold's voice was tense. "Vivian's already filed for divorce. She's seeking a substantial settlement." Ezra's grip on the phone tightened. "What? How is that even possible? It's been less than a day." "I don't know, but her lawyers are moving fast. We need to talk strategy. Can you come in?" I'll be there as soon as I can," Ezra said, his mind reeling. He hung up and turned to the others. "I have to go to the office. Vivian's already filed for divorce." Lydia's eyes narrowed. That was fast. Too fast. "Ezra, before you go, there's something you need to see." She pulled out a file and spread its contents on the coffee table. "These are the results of my investigation into Nexichem. There's a pattern of environmental violations, suspicious accidents at their facilities, and, well, look at this." Ezra leaned in, his legal mind immediately spotting the irregularities in the documents. "This can't be right. These violation reports, they're identical to the ones I filed, but the data's been altered." Zara spoke up, her earlier hostility replaced by professional interest. "I've been helping Lydia dig into Nexichem's digital footprint. Their security is tight, but I've managed to find some discrepancies in their financial records." As if on cue, one of Zara's computers pinged. She rushed over, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Holy shit. Ezra, I think this is for you." She turned the screen, revealing an encrypted email addressed to Ezra. With shaking hands, he entered his password. The message opened, revealing partial financial records that hinted at massive bribes paid by Nexichem to various officials and law firms, including Ezra's own. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Ezra felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage, his career, even his father's death was suddenly in question. Felix was the first to break the silence. "Well, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a good old-fashioned conspiracy. What's the play?" Lydia looked at Ezra, her expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. "That depends on you, big brother. Are you in?" Ezra glanced around the room, at his estranged sister who had never given up searching for the truth, at the brilliant hacker who had put aside her prejudices to help, at his loyal friend ready to dive into danger. Then he thought of Vivian's betrayal, of the altered documents, of his father's suspicious death. He took a deep breath. "I'm in. Let's take these bastards down." Zara grinned, cracking her knuckles as she turned back to her computer. "Now we're talking. Let's see what else we can dig up on Nexichem." As the team began to formulate their plan, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far bigger and more dangerous than any of them realized. But for the first time in years, he felt alive. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it, no matter the cost. Ezra Blackwood straightened his tie, his face a mask of professional detachment as he strode into the offices of Winters, Blackwood, and Associates. The familiar scent of leather and expensive cologne did nothing to calm the storm raging inside him. Every face he passed, every greeting he returned, it all felt like a lie now. He nodded to his secretary, Sarah, as he passed. "Any messages?" "Mr. Winters wants to see you in his office as soon as possible," Sarah replied, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything all right, Mr. Blackwood? There are rumors." Ezra forced a smile. Just a bit under the weather. Nothing to worry about. As soon as his office door closed behind him, Ezra's facade crumbled. He sank into his chair, his mind racing. How deep did this conspiracy go? How many of his colleagues were involved? He booted up his computer, heart pounding as he began to dig through the firm's files on Nexichem. What he found made his blood run cold. Report after report of environmental violations, all neatly covered up with falsified data and legal sleight of hand. And there, buried in a subfolder, was a document detailing a toxic waste spill in a low-income neighborhood. The cancer rates in the area had skyrocketed, but Nexichem had managed to dodge all responsibility. Ezra felt sick. He had built his career on protecting the environment, on holding corporations accountable. And all this time, he had been part of the problem. A commotion outside his office pulled him from his thoughts. He recognized that voice, Vivian. "I don't care if he's busy. He's my husband, and I need to speak with him now." Ezra steeled himself as the door burst open. Vivian stormed in, her eyes blazing with a fury he had never seen before. "You think you can just disappear and ignore my calls?" she hissed. "My lawyers are going to bury you, Ezra. Unless what?" Ezra asked, his voice deceptively calm. Vivian's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Unless you agree to my terms. No questions asked, no fights. You give me what I want, or I'll make sure everyone knows about your dirty little secrets." Ezra's mind raced. What secrets? He had always been faithful, always played by the rules. Then he saw it, the watch on Vivian's wrist. It was too large for her, clearly a man's watch, and he recognized it. It belonged to Harold Winters. Before he could process this new betrayal, his phone buzzed. A message from Harold. "My office. Now." Ezra stood, straightening his suit. "We're not done here, Vivian." Her laughter followed him out the door. "Oh, we're just getting started, darling." Harold's office was a shrine to old money and power. The man himself sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his fingers steepled as he watched Ezra enter. "Sit down, Ezra," Harold said, his tone deceptively friendly. "We need to talk about Nexichem." Ezra's heart skipped a beat. He fought to keep his expression neutral as he took a seat. "What about them?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "I've heard rumors that you've been investigating our biggest client. I'm sure I don't need to remind you about client confidentiality." The threat was clear. Ezra felt a chill run down his spine. "Of course not," he replied smoothly. "I'm just doing my due diligence, making sure all our I's are dotted and T's are crossed." Harold nodded, but his eyes remained cold. "See that you do. Nexichem is very important to this firm. It would be a shame if anything were to jeopardize that relationship." As Ezra left Harold's office, his phone buzzed again. A message from Felix. "Got something you need to see. Meet me at the usual spot." An hour later, Ezra sat in a dimly lit bar, watching surveillance footage on Felix's laptop. His stomach churned as he saw Harold, Vivian, and a man he recognized as Marcus Thorne, Nexichem's CEO, meeting at a secluded marina. "When was this taken?" Ezra asked, his voice hoarse. Felix's expression was grim. 2 days ago." "Ezra, I think your wife's affair, it wasn't just about sex. I think it was orchestrated to keep you in check." Ezra nodded, the pieces falling into place. His own firm, his own wife. They were all part of Nexichem's web of deceit, and he had been the fool at the center of it all. "We need to bring them down," Ezra said, his voice filled with cold determination. "All of them." Felix nodded, his eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt. "Where do we start?" Zara's fingers flew across the keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. Lydia paced behind her, while Ezra sat perfectly still, his lawyer's mind cataloging every detail. "Got it," Zara announced, her voice tight with excitement. "I've decrypted the anonymous email. You're not going to believe this." The screen's filled with financial records, showing a complex web of transactions between Nexichem, Winters, Blackwood and Associates, and a dozen shell companies. "It's a massive money laundering operation," Lydia breathed, her journalist instincts on fire. "They're hiding millions in bribes and payoffs." Ezra's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Need to talk. It's about Nexichem. Meet me in the parking garage. Level B2. Mia." He recognized the name. Mia Rodriguez, a paralegal at the firm. Young, ambitious, and sharp as a tack. What did she know? "I have to go," Ezra said, standing abruptly. "Keep digging. We need everything you can find." The parking garage was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of oil and exhaust. Ezra's footsteps echoed as he made his way to level B2. A figure emerged from the shadows, Mia, her eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, glancing around nervously. I found something about Nexichem. I think they're dumping toxic waste illegally." Ezra's heart raced. "Tell me everything." Mia's words tumbled out in a rush. She had been organizing files when she stumbled across documents detailing Nexichem's illegal activities. For months, she had been quietly gathering evidence, terrified of what might happen if she came forward. "I want to do the right thing," Mia said, her voice shaking. "But I'm scared. These people, they're powerful. They're dangerous." Ezra placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Mia. We'll protect you. I promise." As they formulated a plan for Mia to act as a whistleblower, with Ezra as her legal representation, Lydia made another breakthrough. She uncovered old news articles suggesting that their father, James Blackwood, had been investigating Nexichem before his death. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more horrifying than any of them had imagined. But as they prepared to go public with their evidence, a new complication arose. Vivian reached out to Ezra, her voice honey-sweet on the phone. "Darling, I've made a terrible mistake. Can we meet? I want to make things right." Ezra's instinct screamed that it was a trap, but he saw an opportunity. "Of course," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Our usual place." As Vivian spun her tale of manipulation and regret, Ezra discreetly recorded every word. He didn't believe her for a second, but her confession might prove useful. Their celebration was short-lived, however. Zara discovered that their communications had been compromised. Nexichem's private security force was watching their every move. The net was closing in, but Ezra and his team were ready for a fight. The abandoned Nexichem research facility loomed before them, a hulking shadow against the night sky. Ezra's heart pounded as he and Felix approached, their footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass. Mia had vanished without a trace, just as they were preparing to go public with their evidence. Felix had traced her last known location to this facility, and now they were walking into what felt very much like a trap. "I don't like this," Felix muttered, his hand hovering near the gun concealed under his jacket. "It's too quiet." Ezra nodded. "We don't have a choice. Mia risked everything to help us. We can't abandon her now." They found a rusted side door, the lock easily picked by Felix's skilled hands. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of chemicals. Their flashlights revealed abandoned equipment, shattered glass, and ominous dark stains on the floor. As they delved deeper into the facility, they stumbled upon a room that made Ezra's blood run cold. It was a makeshift laboratory, filled with bubbling vats of noxious liquid and cages that had clearly once held test subjects. The implications were horrifying. "My God," Felix whispered, snapping photos with his phone. "This is way bigger than we thought. They're not just dumping toxic waste. They're creating it." A noise from the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps getting closer. They ducked behind a large piece of equipment, hearts racing as a group of men entered the room. At their head was Marcus Thorne, Nexichem CEO, his expensive suit incongruous in the decrepit lab. "Find them," Marcus snarled to his security team. "They can't be allowed to leave here alive." Ezra and Felix exchanged a look of panic. They were trapped, outgunned, and running out of options. But before they could move, another figure entered the room, Lydia. Ezra's heart stopped. What was his sister doing here? But as he watched, his confusion turned to horror. Lydia walked up to Marcus, her posture relaxed, familiar. "The basement is clear," she reported. "No sign of them." Marcus nodded. "Good work, Agent Blackwood. Your cover has been invaluable to us." Ezra felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Lydia, working for Nexichem? It couldn't be true. But as he watched his sister interact with the man responsible for so much suffering, doubt crept in. Had everything been a lie? The standoff that followed was tense, with Lydia clearly torn between her loyalty to her brother and her commitment to whatever mission she was on. Ezra's mind raced, trying to make sense of this betrayal, but there was no time for explanations. As Marcus's men closed in, violence erupted. In the chaos, Felix was hit, crying out in pain as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Ezra managed to fight his way to a locked door, behind which they found Mia, terrified but alive. As they fled the facility, alarms blaring and gunshots echoing behind them, Lydia appeared one last time. She pressed a USB drive into Ezra's hand, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll explain everything, I promise. But you have to go. Now." Ezra hesitated, 1,000 questions on his lips. But with Felix bleeding and Mia shaking with fear, he knew they had no choice. They ran into the night, leaving Lydia behind to maintain her cover, whatever that truly meant. As they sped away in Felix's car, Ezra clutched the USB drive, his mind reeling. The evidence they had gathered, the risks they had taken, the betrayals they had suffered. It all paled in comparison to the realization that this conspiracy went deeper than any of them had imagined. And at the center of it all was his sister, a woman he thought he knew, now a stranger playing a game he didn't understand. As the city lights blurred past, Ezra made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Nexichem, Winters, Blackwood, and Associates, even Lydia herself, they would all face justice. The web of deceit was vast, but Ezra was done being a fly caught in its strands. It was time to become the spider. The safe house was a far cry from the luxury Ezra Blackwood was accustomed to. Peeling wallpaper, the musty smell of old books, and a pervasive dampness that seemed to seep into his bones. But right now, it was the safest place in the world. Ezra sat at a rickety table, his laptop open before him, surrounded by stacks of documents. Across from him, Mia Rodriguez pored over financial records, her brow furrowed in concentration. In the corner, Zara's fingers flew across her keyboard, the glow of multiple screens illuminating her face in the dim room. They had been here for days, maybe weeks. Time had become a blur. Felix's activist contacts had come through, providing them with a network of safe houses to move between. But the constant fear of discovery, the paranoia that each shadow held an enemy, was taking its toll. Ezra rubbed his eyes, trying to focus on the document before him. His mind kept drifting to Lydia, his sister, the undercover agent. The betrayal still stung, even as he tried to rationalize it. Was she really on their side? Or had everything been a lie? Holy shit. Zara's voice cut through the silence. You guys need to see this. Ezra and Mia crowded around Zara's workstation. On the screen, plans for a massive construction project unfolded. They're planning to dump toxic waste in the Oakwood Nature Reserve, Zara explained, her voice tight with anger. If this goes through, it'll contaminate the groundwater for the entire region. Ezra felt his stomach churn. Oakwood was one of the last unspoiled areas in the state, home to endangered species and a vital water source for surrounding communities. We can't let this happen, Mia said, her voice shaking with determination. We have to stop them. Ezra nodded, his mind already racing with legal strategies. We need more evidence. Concrete proof that links Nexichem to the dump site. As if on cue, Ezra's burner phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Ezra, Vivian's voice uncharacteristically hesitant. We need to talk. I want to help. Ezra's grip on the phone tightened. Why should I believe you? Because I know things, Ezra. Things that could bring down Nexichem, Harold. All of them. Meet me, please. For old time's sake. Ezra's mind raced. It could be a trap, but if Vivian was telling the truth, her testimony could be the key to breaking the case wide open. I'll think about it, he said finally, and hung up. Zara and Mia looked at him expectantly. Ezra sighed. That was Vivian. She says she wants to help. Mia's eyes widened. You can't seriously be considering trusting her. We don't have to trust her, Ezra replied, a plan forming in his mind. But we can use her. If she's genuine, great. If not, well, we'll be ready. As they began to formulate a plan, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Nexachem's toxic dump could happen any day now. They needed to act fast. But first, he had a decision to make about Lydia. His sister was in deep, playing a dangerous game. Could he trust the information she was feeding them? Or was she leading them into a trap? Ezra stared at the USB drive Lydia had pressed into his hand during their escape from the Nexachem facility. He hadn't told the others about it yet. With a deep breath, he plugged it in. What he found made his blood run cold. Detailed plans of Nexachem's operations, financial records, emails implicating high-level government officials. And at the center of it all, a name that made Ezra's heart stop, James Blackwood. Their father hadn't just been investigating Nexachem before his death. He had uncovered a conspiracy that went far beyond corporate greed. This was about power, about control over the most basic human need, water. Ezra leaned back, his mind reeling. They weren't just fighting a corporation anymore. They were up against a system, a web of corruption that stretched from the boardroom to the highest levels of government. He looked at Mia and Zara, both still poring over documents, unaware of the bombshell Ezra had just uncovered. They had all risked everything to get this far. Now, it was time to take the biggest risk of all. Pack up, Ezra said, his voice filled with determination. We're going to meet Vivian, and then we're going to bring the whole damn system down. The Nexachem boardroom was a study in corporate opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the polished mahogany table reflected the concerned faces of the board members gathered around it. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Nexachem, stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence noticeably shaken. Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you that these allegations are completely unfounded. Nexachem has always operated within the bounds of the law. From her seat at the table, Lydia Blackwood fought to keep her expression neutral. Years of undercover work had honed her poker face, but even she was finding it difficult to maintain her composure. Everything was coming to a head, and she prayed that Ezra's plan would work. As if on cue, the doors burst open. Ezra strode in, Mia at his side, followed by a team of federal agents. The room erupted in chaos. Marcus Thorne, Ezra's voice cut through the commotion. You and your co-conspirators are under arrest for environmental crimes, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus's face contorted with rage. This is absurd. You have no authority. Oh, but we do, Mia interrupted, her voice steady despite her nervousness. She nodded to Zara, who had slipped in unnoticed during the confusion. Suddenly, every screen in the room came to life. Financial records, emails, surveillance footage, all the evidence they had painstakingly gathered over the past weeks played out for all to see. At this very moment, Ezra continued, this evidence is being broadcast to every Nexachem employee, shareholder, and regulatory agency. The game is over, Marcus. Lydia stood, finally dropping her cover. And that's not all. We have proof that Nexachem was responsible for the death of James Blackwood, a man who threatened to expose your plan to monopolize water resources through deliberate contamination. The color drained from Marcus's face. He lunged for his laptop, likely containing even more incriminating evidence. But Ezra was faster. What followed was a desperate chase through the Nexachem headquarters. Ezra pursued Marcus through winding corridors and up staircases, their footsteps echoing in the suddenly empty building. They burst onto the roof. The city spread out before them. Marcus stood at the edge, the hard drive clutched in his hand, the wind whipping his usually immaculate suit. It's over, Marcus, Ezra called out, cautiously approaching. There's nowhere left to run. Marcus turned, a wild look in his eyes. You don't understand, Blackwood. This goes beyond Nexachem, beyond me. We were creating a better world. By poisoning people? By killing my father? Ezra's voice cracked with emotion. How is that a better world? Resources are running out, Marcus snarled. Water is the new oil. Whoever controls it controls everything. Your father was too idealistic to see that. Just like you. Ezra took another step forward. It doesn't have to be this way, Marcus. Turn yourself in. Tell the truth. Maybe then we can actually build a better world. For a moment, it seemed like Marcus might consider it. Then, with a bitter laugh, he hurled the hard drive off the roof. Ezra lunged for it, but it was too late. The small device disappeared into the city below, taking with it the names of countless corrupt officials. As the authorities led Marcus away, Ezra stood at the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The congressional hearing room was packed. Journalists, activists, and curious citizens filled every available seat, while cameras broadcast the proceedings to millions around the world. Ezra adjusted his tie, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. Beside him, Lydia gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Despite the years of separation and recent revelations, they were in this together now. Mr. Blackwood, the committee chairman began, please tell us in your own words what you uncovered about Nexachem and its collaborators. For the next several hours, Ezra and Lydia laid out the entire conspiracy, the environmental violations, the cover-ups, the bribes, and finally, the truth about their father's death. As they spoke, screens around the room displayed evidence, much of it provided by Harold Winters in exchange for a plea deal. In another part of the city, Vivian Blackwood was led away from her private jet in handcuffs, her attempt to flee the country thwarted by an anonymous tip. Back in the hearing room, Ezra concluded his testimony. Nexachem's crimes are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a deeper sickness in our society, where profit is prioritized over people, and the environment is seen as a resource to be exploited rather than protected. It's time for a change. The aftermath of the hearing was a whirlwind. Indictments were handed down, regulations were tightened, and a national conversation about corporate responsibility and environmental protection took center stage. Months passed. Ezra found himself standing before a group of eager law students, their faces a mix of idealism and uncertainty that reminded him of himself. Not so long ago. The law is a powerful tool, he told them, but it's only as good as the people wielding it. You have the power to shape the future, to fight for justice, to protect those who can't protect themselves. Use it wisely. As the students filed out, Ezra's phone buzzed with a message from Lydia. Her book, Exposing Corporate Environmental Crimes, was hitting shelves next week, another step in their ongoing fight. Later that evening, Ezra met with Felix and Zara at their new office. The sign on the door read Clearwater Tech, Innovative Solutions for a Cleaner Future. Felix, his arm still in a sling but his spirit unbroken, grinned as Ezra entered. Welcome to the revolution, counselor. Zara looked up from her computer, her eyes bright with excitement. We just finalized the plans for our first water purification plant. Want to see? As Ezra looked over the plans, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in years. They had a long way to go, but they were on the right path. His phone buzzed again. A message from Mia, now in her second year of law school, top of her class. She was interning at an environmental law firm over the summer and wanted Ezra's advice on a case. Ezra smiled as he typed his reply. The fight for justice was far from over, but they weren't in it alone anymore. A new generation was rising, armed with knowledge, passion, and the determination to make a difference. As he left the office that night, Ezra paused to look up at the stars, barely visible through the city's light pollution. Somewhere up there, he liked to think his father was watching, proud of what they had accomplished and what they continued to fight for. The web of deceit had been torn down, but the work of rebuilding, of creating a more just and sustainable world, was just beginning. And Ezra Blackwood was ready for the challenge. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
You never really think it'll happen to you, do you? I mean, all those stories you hear about people cheating on their spouses, ruining lives, ripping families apart. It's the kind of stuff you imagine happens to other people. Not me. Not John, the guy who works his ass off at a corporate job to make sure his family has everything they need. Not to me, who married Megan, the fitness junkie who looked like she was made out of stone but could still soften up enough to be a mom to our 2 kids, Evan and Lauren. Our life wasn't perfect, but we were doing all right. Or so I thought. Megan, well, she was a fitness instructor. You know the type. Always in those skin-tight yoga pants, spending every waking moment at the gym, and making you feel guilty for grabbing that extra slice of pizza. Meanwhile, I was the typical desk jockey, slaving away at a corporation that couldn't care less about its employees as long as the numbers looked good at the end of the month. Things started going south when Megan kept talking about how tired she was. She'd come home, flop down on the couch, and complain about feeling like she was dragging all the time. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was always pushing herself hard at the gym, always running from one training session to the next. Fatigue made sense. But then the complaints got more serious. She wasn't just tired, she was sick. So, of course, she went to the doctor. I wasn't expecting the phone call I got that day, though. Megan sounded off, almost panicked. "I need to talk to you when I get home," she said. That's it. Nothing else. Just left me hanging with my stomach doing flips, wondering what the hell was going on. When she finally got home, the first words out of her mouth hit me like a sledgehammer. "I have an STD," she said, just like that. No lead up, no sugarcoating, nothing. I blinked. "What?" "A sexually transmitted disease, John. The doctor ran some tests, and that's what it is." Now, here's where most guys would probably lose their cool, throw a tantrum, maybe even start throwing accusations right away. But I just stood there, stunned, trying to process what she was telling me. Megan had an STD. My wife had an STD. The next thing the doctor tells me is that I should get tested too, just to be sure. And you know what? Sure enough, the results came back positive. I had it too. That little fact turned our marriage from a shaky platform to full-on quicksand. The trust, the foundation of everything, was gone just like that. Megan, though, she didn't even flinch. She immediately turned the tables on me. "This is your fault," she snapped the moment we were alone. "Who the hell have you been messing around with?" I stood there in complete disbelief. Me? Cheating? I'd been nothing but faithful to this woman. And here she was, pointing fingers at me, as if I was the one who had been sneaking around. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. "Megan, are you serious right now? I haven't been with anyone but you. How could you even say that?" But she didn't stop. Megan could be relentless when she wanted to be, and that night, she was out for blood. Every little thing I'd done in the last 6 months got thrown back in my face. I didn't pay enough attention to her. I worked too much. I didn't support her gym goals enough. You name it, it was suddenly my fault. In the middle of her rant, it hit me. Her distance, her late nights at the gym, the sudden new outfits she'd start wearing after work. It all started to make sense. This wasn't my fault. Megan was hiding something, and it wasn't just her gym routine. I kept my cool that night, but in my mind, things started clicking into place. I wasn't stupid. I knew the signs. I'd just been too wrapped up in work and the kids to see what was going on right under my nose. And then there was Jenny, Megan's best friend. Jenny was over all the time, practically part of the family at this point. But lately, I'd noticed something odd. Megan and Jenny always seemed to have these secret little conversations. They'd disappear into another room, leave me sitting in the living room with the kids like some kind of idiot. It started nagging at me. What were they talking about that was so private? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And it wasn't just Megan's sudden paranoia about me cheating. It was the way she'd gotten colder over the last few months, like she was always a little bit checked out. There was always an excuse. Late at the gym, a client that needed extra help, a friend's emergency. Still, I tried to push through. We had kids, after all. Evan, 10, and Lauren, 7. Sweet kids, but smart. They could feel the tension between us, especially Lauren. She'd look up at me with those wide eyes. asking why mommy and daddy were always fighting. I'd sit with her, read her a story, or help her with homework, all the while trying to pretend that everything was fine. But it wasn't. I knew it, and deep down, Megan knew it too. So here we were, two adults barely talking to each other, stuck in the same house, pretending like our marriage wasn't a sinking ship. I could feel the cracks widening every day, but Megan wasn't about to admit to anything. No, she was the victim, the one who'd been wronged, the one who needed me to confess to something I hadn't done. But I wasn't the one hiding something. She was, and I was going to find out what it was. It didn't take long for the doubts to start creeping in. After the whole STD bombshell, Megan got more defensive, more secretive. The woman who used to leave her phone lying around now kept it glued to her side. Always texting, always flipping her screen down the second I got close. I'd catch her in the middle of a message, and she'd act like it was no big deal, brushing it off with a quick smile. "What, you think I'm hiding something?" she'd say, eyes challenging me. It was the same bullshit every time, turning the suspicion back on me as if I was the one sneaking around. Then there was the gym. Megan had always been a gym rat, but now it seemed like her second home. Hell, maybe even her first. She was always there, weekends, late evenings, times she never used to go. It was as if she was avoiding being at home with me and the kids, and it wasn't subtle either. One Saturday morning, I decided to test the waters. I casually mentioned that I wanted to start working out more, get back in shape. I could see her eyes widen for just a split second before she plastered on that fake supportive smile. "Oh, that's great, John. But, maybe not today. I've got a really busy schedule with clients. It'd be hard to fit you in." Fit me in? We were married, for Christ's sake. I didn't need to be fit into her schedule. The excuses kept coming. Every time I suggested going with her, she had a reason why it wasn't convenient. A client needed her extra attention, the gym was packed, or she just didn't feel like being distracted. Distracted by me, apparently. I knew what was up. I wasn't born yesterday. I mean, no one spends that much time at the gym unless they're trying to avoid someone or something. Or, in her case, trying to sneak around. That's when I decided I couldn't keep playing dumb. I needed answers. And if Megan wasn't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. Hiring a private investigator wasn't a decision I took lightly. But at this point, I was done with her games. I needed the truth, and I needed proof. So, I called Michael, recommended by a friend of a friend. He specialized in this kind of thing, and I didn't have any problem trusting him with this dirty job. Michael didn't waste any time. Within 2 weeks, he had everything I needed. I remember the day he handed me the manila envelope, thick with evidence. My stomach dropped as I opened it, knowing that whatever was inside would confirm what I already knew but wasn't ready to face. Photos, videos, all of them showed Megan meeting up with her fitness trainer, Dave. I'd heard her talk about him before, in that casual way she had when she didn't want me to think anything of it. "Oh, Dave said I should try this new routine," or "Dave's been great for my motivation." But now I was staring at pictures of my wife meeting Dave in parking lots, exchanging long glances, even sneaking a kiss before driving off to God knows where. The videos were worse. Grainy footage of them leaving together, their bodies pressed too close for just a client and trainer relationship. I felt a mixture of rage and numbness. Part of me wanted to smash something, to yell at her, confront her right there. But another part of me, maybe the more dangerous part, was cold, calculating. Now wasn't the time for emotion. Now was the time to plan. Over the next few days, I couldn't help but notice every little detail Megan tried to hide. Her phone, always on silent. The way she suddenly started wearing new workout clothes, flashy tight, the kind that screamed, "Look at me." She'd come home late, sweating, but not from any workout I was familiar with. I started piecing it together like a detective in one of those crime shows. The new lingerie in her drawer, the one she hadn't worn for me, that was for Dave, I knew it. The long training sessions that somehow stretched into hours. And then there was Jenny, her best friend, the perfect alibi. Megan would often claim to be spending time with Jenny, grabbing coffee, or having some girl time. But I wasn't stupid. Jenny was the cover. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how often Megan used her as an excuse. Meanwhile, Jenny, bless her clueless soul, had no idea she was being played just like me. It was all too much to ignore. Every time Megan left the house, every time she looked at her phone with that sneaky little smile, it only added fuel to the fire. My mind kept going over every suspicious moment, every lie she told, every time she brushed off my concerns. I started noticing even more things. Her mood swings. One minute she'd be her usual bubbly self, and the next she'd snap at me for the smallest thing. It was like she was always on edge, waiting for something to blow up. Maybe she was scared I'd figure it out. Maybe she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of an easy out. I wasn't going to explode in some dramatic confrontation. No, I was going to make her sweat. I had the proof now. I had the upper hand, and I was going to use it. Jenny came over one night, as usual. She sat in the living room, chatting away with Megan while I pretended not to care. But I couldn't stop watching them. Megan, laughing too easily, trying too hard to act normal. And Jenny oblivious, thinking everything was fine. Little did they know I was already 5 steps ahead. After Michael handed me that envelope, the path forward was clear. I wasn't going to confront Megan right away. No, that would have been too easy for her, too satisfying. She didn't deserve an explosion, some heated argument where she could twist everything around and try to make me the villain. No, I had something better in mind. Revenge. I started by analyzing the evidence. Those photos and videos were like gold in my hands. They weren't just proof of Megan's betrayal. They were my ticket to making her squirm, to tearing apart the little world she and Dave thought they had built in secret. Dave, the cocky bastard, thought he could mess around with my wife and just walk away like nothing happened. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't going to just show Megan the evidence and walk away. That would have been the easy route, and I wasn't about to give her any sort of mercy. I wanted to make her life difficult, slowly, painfully, and I wanted Dave to pay for screwing with my marriage. Literally. I bided my time, playing along like everything was normal at home. Every day, Megan would come home a little later, her excuses growing weaker, her smiles more forced. I watched her, knowing what she was up to, but not saying a damn thing. The tension was palpable. She was nervous, probably wondering if I had figured it out. Maybe that STD scare had gotten to her more than I realized. Either way, I kept my cool. But at night, after the kids were in bed and Megan had retreated to her side of the bed, I was strategizing. I didn't just want Dave to lose Megan. No, I wanted him to lose everything. His job, his reputation, whatever future he thought he had lined up as some hotshot personal trainer. He didn't deserve to keep coasting along after what he did. So, I made an appointment with the gym's management, under the pretense of wanting to discuss a potential membership upgrade. A bullshit reason, but it got me in the door. When I sat down with the manager, a middle-aged guy named Robert, I could tell he wasn't ready for what I was about to unload. I started by showing him the photos, Megan and Dave sneaking around, not exactly hiding their little rendezvous. Robert's face went from confused to shocked in a matter of seconds. I'm not here to cause a scene, I told him, keeping my voice calm and measured, even though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. But I think you want to take a look at these. Your employee, Dave, has been getting a little too friendly with one of his clients. I slid the photos across the desk and watched Robert's eyes widen. He wasn't just shocked, he was pissed. The gym had a reputation to uphold, after all, and the last thing they wanted was a scandal involving a trainer screwing around with a married client. If this goes public, I continued, it could be bad for business. But I'm willing to keep it quiet, on one condition. You fire Dave, no questions asked, and make sure he doesn't get any glowing recommendations for his next job. Make it hard for him to find work in this town. Robert didn't argue. He knew I had them cornered. Within the hour, Dave was out of a job. Just like that, I'd stripped him of his livelihood. But I wasn't done yet. On my way out, I ran into Bob, one of the gym's older employees. Bob wasn't exactly close to Dave, and from the way he talked, I could tell he didn't have much respect for the guy either. He'd seen Dave's antics for a while, flirting with clients, taking advantage of his position. It wasn't new, but apparently Megan was just the latest in a long line of poor decisions. Bob wasn't shy about helping me out. "I've seen what he's been doing," Bob said, keeping his voice low as we chatted near the gym's front desk. "I don't like how he treats people here. You did the right thing." We exchanged numbers, and Bob promised to keep me updated on any fallout. He didn't need much convincing. He was just as eager to see Dave go down as I was. Meanwhile, at home, I kept playing the long game with Megan. Every time she came home from her sessions at the gym, I could see the nervous energy radiating off her. Maybe she was starting to sense that things weren't adding up. Maybe Dave was feeling the heat from his sudden unemployment, or maybe it was just her own guilt catching up to her. Either way, she was on edge, and I loved it. I started messing with her head, just a little. I'd make offhand comments about the gym, about how Dave must be so busy with all his clients. I could see her face tense up, her smile faltering. She didn't know I already knew everything, and that uncertainty was eating away at her. One night, as we sat down for dinner, I casually mentioned, "Hey, I heard the gym fired one of their trainers. Tough break, huh?" I watched her eyes flicker with panic for just a split second before she composed herself. "Oh yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "I think I heard about that, but I didn't know him very well." Liar. I could feel the power shift right there at the table. She was slipping, and she knew it. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook just yet. Let her squirm a little longer. The longer I waited, the more anxious she got. Megan's little affair with Dave was crumbling, and she had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. She still thought she was in control, still thought she could keep me in the dark. But I wasn't just going to let this blow over. Not yet. I had more in store for both of them, and by the time I was done, Megan wouldn't even recognize the life she had once thought was so secure. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about making sure she knew, deep down, that she had messed with the wrong man. And I was just getting started. I'd already destroyed Dave's career, and Megan was teetering on the edge, though she didn't know it yet. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. There was one more move I needed to make. Something more personal, something that would cut even deeper. That's where Jenny came in. Jenny had always been around. Megan's best friend since college. She was over at our house constantly, popping by for drinks, dinner, or just to gossip with Megan about whatever drama was going on in their little circle. At first, I hadn't thought much of her. She was nice enough, and we got along, but I never paid her any special attention. But recently, after everything that had gone down with Megan, I started noticing things. The way Jenny's eyes would linger on me just a little too long. How her laugh would come a bit too easily whenever I cracked a joke. Maybe it was all in my head, or maybe it was real. But one thing was certain, she was attracted to me. And once I saw that, the next step in my revenge became obvious. I didn't plan it right away. At first, it was just a thought. A dark, twisted fantasy about getting back at Megan by seducing her best friend. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the perfect move. If I could have Jenny, if I could sleep with her and make it clear that Megan's betrayal wasn't just one-sided, it would crush her. She would lose her husband and her best friend all in one blow. The opportunity came one Friday evening when Megan was out at the gym, probably meeting up with Dave. Not that he was much help to her now that he was unemployed. Jenny came over for what seemed like a casual visit, just a glass of wine and some idle chatter. But as soon as she walked through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. I played it cool, keeping the conversation light at first. We sat on the couch, a bottle of wine between us, and talked about everything and nothing. But there was something different in Jenny's demeanor that night. She was playful. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was something more, but her laughter came a little too easily, and her hand rested on my arm a little longer than necessary. I started testing the waters, throwing out subtle compliments, seeing how far I could push before she'd push back. But she never did. Every compliment I gave, every little flirtatious remark I made, she accepted with a smile and a blush. It was almost too easy. At one point, Jenny made some joke about how Megan's lucky to have you. And that's when I knew I had her. I leaned in a little closer, letting my voice drop to that low, conspiratorial tone that makes things feel more intimate. Lucky, I said with a smirk. I don't know about that. Sometimes I wonder if she even notices I'm still around. Jenny's eyes met mine, and there was something unspoken there, a connection we both understood but didn't need to put into words. She bit her lip, clearly unsure of what to say, but the way she looked at me said enough. She was intrigued. She was interested. I slid closer to her on the couch, letting my knee brush against hers. She didn't move away. You know, I said, keeping my voice soft, sometimes I think it's nice just to talk to someone who actually sees me. Her breath hitched slightly, and she shifted in her seat, clearly flustered but not backing away. I could feel the electricity between us, the tension building with every second that passed. And then, without thinking, no, scratch that, I knew exactly what I was doing. I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, letting my fingers graze her cheek. Jenny froze, her eyes wide, but she didn't pull away. "You're beautiful," I murmured, leaning in just a fraction closer. Her lips parted slightly, her breath shallow, and in that moment, I knew she wanted it as much as I did. The next move was hers. She could pull away, laugh it off, pretend like this wasn't happening. Or she could lean into it, let it happen, and she leaned. Before I knew it, her lips were on mine, soft and hesitant at first, but growing more confident with each passing second. I kissed her back, feeling a surge of satisfaction, not just from the physical act, but from knowing what this would mean for Megan when she eventually found out. We didn't waste any time after that. One thing led to another, and before long, we were tangled up in each other, lost in the heat of the moment. It wasn't love, not by a long shot. It wasn't even lust. It was revenge, pure and simple, and it felt damn good. When it was over, we lay there in silence for a while, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Jenny seemed a little dazed, maybe even regretful, but I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. This was all part of the plan. For her, maybe it had been a mistake, a one-night slip-up she'd want to forget. But for me, it was a calculated move, a way to humiliate Megan on a deeper level, to take something from her that she would never be able to get back. I could see the guilt start to creep into Jenny's eyes as she pulled her clothes back on, fumbling with her blouse as if she was suddenly ashamed of what we'd done. But I didn't say anything to reassure her. I didn't need to. I had gotten what I wanted, and that was enough. As she left, she hesitated at the door, her voice soft and uncertain. This stays between us, right? I gave her a smile, that cold, calculated one I'd been perfecting over the past few weeks. Of course, our little secret. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Maybe she already knew that secrets like this never stay buried for long. After she left, I sat back on the couch, a feeling of triumph washing over me. Megan was still out, oblivious to the fact that her husband and best friend had just betrayed her in the most intimate way possible. She thought she was in control, thought she could keep up her little charade with Dave. But when she eventually found out about Jenny and me, it would destroy her. And I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when it all came crashing down. The beauty of it all? Megan was still completely unaware, still carrying on with her life as if nothing was wrong. She had no idea that her best friend had just spent the night in our bed. And that made my victory all the sweeter. I knew the moment had come. After weeks of letting Megan squirm, playing her own guilt and paranoia against her, it was time to pull the plug. The satisfaction I'd been waiting for, the final blow that would shatter her world, was right in front of me. It was a Friday night, and the kids were asleep. I'd been thinking about this confrontation for days, running it over in my head, imagining how it would go down. Part of me wanted it to be a screaming match, the kind where all the pent-up frustration and anger could finally spill out. But the colder, more methodical part of me knew that staying calm, staying detached, would hurt her more. If she thought she could manipulate me, twist things to make herself the victim, I'd shut that down immediately. I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, probably texting Dave. The thought of it made me sick, but I kept my face blank. She looked up as I entered the room, her expression neutral. She hadn't a clue what was coming. "Megan," I said, my voice low and steady. "We need to talk." There must have been something in my tone, because her eyes flickered with a bit of nervousness. "What's going on?" she asked, setting her phone down, but not too far. Always keeping it close. I didn't waste any time. I pulled out the envelope Michael had given me weeks ago, the one filled with photos and videos of her and Dave sneaking around like a couple of horny teenagers. I tossed it on the coffee table between us. She stared at it, not moving, her face frozen. "What's that?" she asked, her voice already starting to crack. She knew. Deep down, she knew what was inside. "Open it," I said, crossing my arms as I leaned against the back of the couch. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice calm, emotionless. Megan's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. She opened it slowly, as if dragging it out would somehow change what was inside. But nothing could change what was in there. The truth was right in front of her. As she pulled out the photos, her face went pale. She flicked through them in silence, her eyes widening with every image. I could see the panic setting in, the realization that her little secret wasn't a secret anymore. She started, but I cut her off. "Don't. Just don't." I took out my phone and pressed play on one of the videos Michael had captured. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but it was enough. Enough to show her sneaking out of a parking lot with Dave, their hands all over each other. "I know everything, Megan. The affair with Dave, the lies, the excuses. All of it." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she tried to recover, to play innocent like she always did. "John, it's not what you think. He's just—" "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice cutting through her pathetic attempt at denial. "I have the photos, the videos. I've known for weeks, so don't even try to deny it." Her face crumpled, and I could see the cracks in her composure. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a second, I thought she was going to cry. But it wasn't real. None of it was real. "John, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I was lonely, and you weren't there for me. You've been so distant, so wrapped up in work." There it was, the same old song and dance. She was going to turn this around on me, make herself the victim, try to blame her affair on me. The anger that had been simmering inside me for so long finally bubbled over. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. You're the one who cheated. You're the one who lied. Don't act like I'm the reason you decided to spread your legs for him." Her tears started falling then, but I didn't care. I'd seen this act before, and I wasn't buying it. "Not this time. I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice cold and final. "And I'm going to fight for full custody of the kids." At that, her sobbing got louder. "No, John, please. We can work this out. Think about Evan and Lauren. They need us both." "I am thinking about them," I said sharply, "which is why I'm going to make sure they don't have to grow up in a house with a cheating mother." Megan collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I could feel the tiniest bit of satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Just when I thought it was over, the front door creaked open, and Jenny stepped inside. I hadn't expected her to show up tonight, but in a twisted way, it was perfect timing. This was going to get even uglier. Megan looked up through her tears, seeing her best friend enter the room. "Jenny, please tell him. Tell him it was a mistake. Tell him." But Jenny's face was as pale as a ghost. She walked slowly toward us, her hands trembling. "Megan," she whispered, her voice filled with guilt. "There's something I need to tell you." I watched as the words struggled to form on Jenny's lips. She glanced at me, then back at Megan, her eyes filled with shame. "What is it?" Megan asked, her voice thick with tears. Jenny took a deep breath and looked Megan straight in the eye. I contracted an STD, Megan, and it wasn't from anyone I've been seeing. It was from John." Megan froze, her sobs stopping abruptly as the words hit her. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. Her face twisted in disbelief, then horror, then rage. "You what?" Megan's voice was barely a whisper. Jenny kept talking, unable to stop the flood of guilt. "I'm sorry. We slept together. It was just once, but it happened." For a second, I thought Megan might explode, scream, yell, throw something, but she didn't. Instead, she just sat there, her whole body shaking, her mind struggling to process what had just been dropped on her. The betrayal from her best friend, the reality of what I had done. And that was it. Megan was broken. I could see it in her eyes. The affair with Dave was nothing compared to what she had just found out. The man she had cheated on, the husband she thought she had under her thumb, had slept with her best friend. And there was no going back from that. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to say anything else. The damage was done, and Megan's world had just collapsed around her. The last thing I heard as I walked out the door was her broken sobs, the sound of her life shattering into pieces. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The day the divorce was finalized felt like stepping into the sunlight after years of living in a dark, suffocating tunnel. It was official. Megan was no longer part of my life. The kids were with me most of the time, and the shackles of a toxic marriage were finally broken. The relief that washed over me was indescribable. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely. In the months leading up to that moment, I had been planning for something bigger, something I had put on the back burner for far too long. Megan had always found a way to shoot down my dreams, constantly reminding me how risky it was, how unsafe it would be for the family. And like a fool, I let her. I let her keep me stuck in a life that I didn't really want. But now there was nothing standing in my way. I had always dreamed of opening my own business, a small tech consulting firm. I had the skills, the experience, the connections. Hell, I'd been doing it for years, working for other people, making them rich while I stayed stagnant. The difference now was that I was doing it for myself. With Megan gone, I poured myself into the business with the kind of passion I hadn't felt in years. I rented a small office space downtown and started making calls. At first, it was slow. A few contracts here and there, nothing big. But as word got out, as people saw what I could offer, things started to take off. I remember the first time I signed a major client. It was a healthcare company looking to overhaul their entire IT infrastructure. It was a massive project, more than I'd ever taken on by myself before, but I didn't hesitate. I took the leap, and it paid off. Within a year, my business was booming. I had more work than I could handle on my own, so I hired a few more people, old colleagues who trusted me and wanted to work for someone who wasn't a corporate robot. We worked hard, sure, but it was on my terms. I was calling the shots, and it felt incredible. Every new contract, every successful project was a reminder that I didn't need Megan, that I never needed her holding me back. I was free. As my business grew, so did my confidence. I wasn't just a guy trying to get through the day anymore. I was successful. I was building something real, something that was mine. And with that success came a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. No more games, no more manipulation. Just me and the life I was carving out for myself and my kids. And then there was Megan. Her life, on the other hand, was unraveling. Word got around about the affair. It always does in these situations. First, it was whispers at the gym, in the PDA, among her friends. People started to distance themselves, not openly at first, but it was enough that she noticed. The invitations to social events stopped coming. Her so-called friends disappeared, one by one, until she was left with no one. The same gym where she'd spent hours with Dave, the place where her life had spiraled out of control, became a place of shame for her. People knew. They talked behind her back. Her reputation crumbled faster than she could put up her defenses. She tried to keep up appearances, but I could see it was killing her. The strong, confident woman who had once dominated every room she entered was now a shell of her former self. She was lonely, isolated, and worst of all, she knew it was her own fault. She had thrown away her family, her friends, her reputation for a man who didn't even stick around. I heard through the grapevine that Dave moved on pretty quickly. He found another job in a different town, probably because he couldn't face the fallout of what happened either. And Megan? She was left with nothing but regret. The few times we had to communicate, mostly about the kids, she seemed broken. The sharp, biting remarks that once came so easily from her were gone. She barely even looked me in the eye. I wasn't interested in her guilt or her apologies. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My business continued to grow, and with each success, I felt lighter, more liberated. The control Megan once had over me, emotionally, mentally, was gone. I wasn't weighed down by her criticisms or her constant need to undermine everything I wanted to do. Evan and Lauren adjusted well to the new normal. They were happy, happier than I'd seen them in a long time. Our home became a place of laughter again, free from the tension that had suffocated us for so long. I spent more time with them, real quality time, without Megan's constant interruptions or snide remarks. I was finally able to be the dad I wanted to be, not the one she tried to mold me into. There were moments when I'd catch myself thinking about how things had played out, how Megan's life had spiraled downward while mine had taken off. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not one bit. She had made her choices, and this was the consequence. For me, it was a new beginning, a fresh start. The toxic marriage that had once defined me was nothing but a memory now. And as I looked ahead, I knew that my life, my business, my relationship with my kids, and the peace I had found was mine to control. No one else's. Megan had lost everything, but I had gained something far more valuable: my freedom.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. Ethan Blackwood's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel of his Audi R8 as he navigated the congested downtown streets. The sleek sports car, usually a source of pride, felt like a gilded cage in the stop-and-go traffic. His mind raced, consumed by the forgotten wallet that threatened to derail his $1 million proposal presentation. "Damn it," he muttered, glancing at his empty breast pocket for the 100th time. The thought of asking Victoria to bring it down to his office made him wince. He could already hear her sardonic comments about his absent-mindedness. With a sudden jerk of the wheel, Ethan cut across 2 lanes of honking traffic, ignoring the chorus of blaring horns. He'd grab the wallet himself and be back on the road in 10 minutes. No need to give Victoria more ammunition for her little jabs. As he pulled into the private parking area of his luxurious penthouse, Ethan's eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar Porsche 911 parked haphazardly nearby. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he approached their door, an unsettling silence greeting him as he entered. "Victoria," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast open-plan living area. No response. The muffled sounds coming from the master bedroom sent a chill down his spine. Ethan's hand hesitated on the doorknob for a split second before he pushed it open. The sight that greeted him sent his world spinning off its axis. A shirtless man, tall and muscular, stood by the bed, carelessly buttoning his pants. His dark hair was mussed, his chiseled features twisted in surprise, and something that looked unsettlingly like amusement. Rage exploded in Ethan's chest. He lunged forward, grabbing the stranger by the collar. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. Before the man could answer, a flash of silk caught Ethan's peripheral vision. Victoria rushed out of the ensuite bathroom, cinching a robe around her waist. Her face cycled through shock, defiance, and finally settled on a look of cold detachment that chilled Ethan to his core. "Let him go, Ethan," she said, her voice steady and devoid of any guilt or shame. "This is Xavier Thornton, my new love." Ethan's grip on Xavier's collar loosened, more from shock than compliance. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling as he tried to process the surreal scene before him. "What was I to you for 13 years, Victoria?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and vulnerable. Victoria's lips curled into a cruel smile that Ethan had never seen before. It transformed her beautiful face into something alien and malevolent. "A tool, Ethan," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "Just a surviving tool. Xavier here is everything you're not, passionate, spontaneous, and exciting." Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed to inflict maximum pain. Ethan felt his chest constrict, struggling to draw breath as the full weight of her betrayal crashed down upon him. Fury coursing through his veins, Ethan ordered them both out of his house. As Victoria gathered her things, she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret this decision, Ethan. You have no idea what I'm capable of." The threat hung in the air as Victoria and Xavier left, the sound of the Porsche's engine fading into the distance. Ethan stood alone in the bedroom, his world shattered around him. The following days passed in a blur for Ethan. He moved through the prestigious architecture firm like a ghost, going through the motions but feeling utterly disconnected. Every sympathetic glance, every hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, felt like salt in his still raw wounds. It was during a particularly grueling meeting that Marcus Steele, Ethan's colleague and best friend at the firm, finally confronted him. As the other partners filed out of the conference room, Marcus hung back, concern etched deep in the lines of his face. "Ethan, what's going on with you, man?" Marcus asked, his voice low and urgent. "You've been off your game all week. That proposal you presented just now, it's not up to your usual standards. Talk to me." Ethan looked up at his friend, seeing the genuine worry in his eyes. The weight of his secret was crushing him, and Marcus's concern finally cracked his resolve. "It's Victoria," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been cheating on me. I walked in on them, Marcus, in our bed." Marcus's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "Jesus, Ethan, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" As Ethan confided in Marcus, detailing Victoria's threats and his fears, neither man noticed the intern hovering nearby, her eyes wide with interest. By the end of the day, the entire firm would be buzzing with whispers about Ethan Blackwood's scandalous divorce. Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier began their campaign of harassment against Ethan. They spread malicious rumors in their social circle, claiming Ethan was abusive and controlling. Victoria reached out to Ethan's clients, attempting to tarnish his professional reputation with false accusations. The attacks came from all sides, leaving Ethan reeling. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends and colleagues, asking about the rumors. Clients called, demanding explanations for accusations they'd heard. Ethan found himself constantly on the defensive, struggling to maintain his composure and his reputation. As the pressure mounted, Ethan felt increasingly cornered and desperate. The final straw came when he received a call from his bank. Victoria had drained their joint accounts, leaving him nearly penniless. This last betrayal ignited a fierce desire for revenge within Ethan. He realized that playing defense wasn't enough. He needed to fight back. With renewed determination, Ethan reached out to his old college friend, Olivia Chun, now a private investigator. They met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. "Olivia, I need your help," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to dig into Victoria and Xavier's backgrounds. There has to be something I can use against them." Olivia studied him carefully, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. "This isn't like you, Ethan." Ethan's eyes hardened. "They've left me no choice, Liv. Victoria's trying to destroy everything I built. I need to protect myself." Olivia nodded slowly. All right, I'll see what I can find. But Ethan, be careful. Revenge can be a double-edged sword. As Olivia began her investigation, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since his world had imploded. He didn't know what Olivia would uncover, but he was certain of one thing. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The spark of revenge had been ignited, and Ethan was ready to fan it into a roaring flame. Olivia Chen sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of files and the soft glow of multiple computer screens. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between documents as she pieced together the puzzle of Victoria Blackwood and Xavier Thornton's lives. The deeper she dug, the more her brow furrowed. This was no simple case of infidelity. It was a tangled web of deceit that stretched back years. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. What have you found? His voice was taut with barely contained tension. Olivia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. You might want to sit down for this, Ethan. It's not good. She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Just tell me, Liv. All right, she said, pulling up a series of documents on her main screen. Let's start with your wife's lover. Xavier Thornton? That's not his real name. He's actually Xavier Reeves, a known con artist. He's got a history of seducing wealthy women and swindling them out of their money. He's been operating under the radar for years, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law. Ethan's silence was deafening. Olivia continued, her voice softening slightly. And Victoria, I'm sorry, Ethan, but she's not who you thought she was either. I've uncovered a pattern of infidelity going back at least 5 years. But that's not the worst of it. She's been involved in several fraudulent business dealings. Shell companies, embezzlement, the works. Jesus Christ, Ethan muttered. How? How did I not see any of this? Olivia's heart ached for her friend. These people are professionals, Ethan. They're experts at hiding their tracks. But now we know, and that gives us an advantage. There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice hardening with resolve. You're right. Knowledge is power. Send me everything you've got. It's time to fight back. As Olivia compiled her findings into a secure file, her mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about helping a friend anymore. They were dealing with dangerous criminals. She made a mental note to beef up her own security measures. If Victoria and Xavier got wind of her investigation, things could get ugly fast. Across town, Ethan sat in his sparsely furnished apartment, staring at the laptop screen as Olivia's report populated with document after damning document. Each new revelation felt like a physical blow, but with each hit, his resolve strengthened. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Liam Blackwood, his tech-savvy cousin. If anyone could help him gather the electronic evidence needed to bring Victoria and Xavier down, it was Liam. The phone rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. Ethan, long time no hear, cuz. What's up? Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Liam, I need your help. It's bad. Really bad. The cheerfulness drained from Liam's voice, replaced by concern. What's going on, Ethan? I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you come over? And bring your gear. We've got some digital digging to do. There was a pause. Then Liam's voice came back, firm and determined. I'm on my way. Hang tight, cuz. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. As Ethan ended the call, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. With Olivia's investigative skills and Liam's technical expertise, they had a fighting chance. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was coming for them. He turned back to the laptop, steeling himself to dive deeper into the sordid details of his wife's double life. Each revelation stoked the fire of his determination. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. He'd show them just how dirty he could get. The following weeks saw Ethan Blackwood undergo a transformation to the outside world. He appeared a broken man, stumbling through his days in a haze of despair. His colleagues at the architecture firm whispered behind his back, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. But behind closed doors, a different Ethan emerged, with Liam hunched over multiple laptops and Olivia poring over stacks of documents. Ethan's apartment had become a war room. The walls were covered with timelines, connections, and strategies, all aimed at one goal: bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "We need to lure them into a false sense of security," Ethan mused, pacing the length of the living room. "Make them think they've won completely." Liam looked up from his screen, eyebrows raised. "You sure about that, cuz? It's gonna mean taking some hits to your reputation." Ethan's jaw clenched. "My reputation's already in tatters thanks to their smear campaign. At least this way, it serves a purpose." Olivia nodded approvingly. "It's a smart play. If they think you're defeated, they might get sloppy, make mistakes." And so, Operation Broken Man began. Ethan started showing up to work disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed as if from crying or drinking. He fumbled presentations, missed deadlines, and generally gave the impression of a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. The whispers in the office grew louder. "Poor Ethan," they'd say. "He's really lost it since Victoria left him." Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier reveled in their apparent victory. They were spotted at high-end restaurants, luxury boutiques, and exclusive clubs, spending Ethan's money with reckless abandon. Their laughter echoed through the social circles they once shared with Ethan, each public appearance another twist of the knife. But Ethan wasn't as broken as he appeared. Every night he, Liam, and Olivia worked tirelessly, building their case piece by piece. Liam's technical wizardry uncovered a trail of digital breadcrumbs linking Victoria and Xavier to their fraudulent activities. Olivia's network of contacts provided crucial pieces of the puzzle, filling in gaps and corroborating evidence. As their case grew stronger, Ethan realized they needed more. Victims' testimonies could be the nail in the coffin for Victoria and Xavier's operations. With Olivia's help, he began reaching out to those who had fallen prey to the duo's schemes. One name stood out: Sofia Alvarez, Victoria's former business partner. Ethan remembered her vaguely from cocktail parties and charity events, always standing slightly apart from the crowd, her eyes sharp and assessing. He'd always assumed she and Victoria had simply had a falling out. Now, he suspected there was much more to the story. Arranging a meeting with Sofia proved challenging. She was understandably wary, having been burned by Victoria before. But Ethan's persistence paid off, and she finally agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Sofia arrived precisely on time, her posture rigid and her eyes guarded. She slid into the booth across from Ethan, studying him carefully. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice cool and measured, "I must admit, I was surprised to hear from you. What exactly is it you want from me?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "The truth, Ms. Alvarez. About Victoria. About what really happened between you two." Sofia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of pain crossing her face before she schooled her features back into neutrality. "And why should I dredge up ancient history? What's done is done." "Because it's not ancient history," Ethan replied, sliding a folder across the table. "It's happening again. Victoria and her new partner, Xavier, are running the same schemes. They've already hurt people. They'll keep hurting people unless we stop them." Sofia's hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents within. With each page she turned, her composure cracked a little more. Finally, she looked up at Ethan, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I always wondered if I was the only one," she whispered. "If I was just weak, stupid." Ethan reached across the table, gently squeezing her hand. "You weren't weak or stupid, Sofia. You were a victim. But now, you have the power to make sure there are no more victims. Will you help us?" Sofia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. When she met Ethan's gaze again, there was steel in her eyes. "Tell me what you need me to do." As Ethan left the cafe, Sofia's agreement to testify secure, he felt a surge of triumph. The trap was set. Now, It was time to spring it. The early morning stillness was shattered by the insistent buzzing of a phone. Special Agent Sarah Donovan fumbled for her cell, squinting at the bright screen. An anonymous tip. Another dead end, probably, but in her line of work, you never knew when a seemingly insignificant lead might crack a case wide open. As she listened to the distorted voice on the other end of the line, her eyes widened. Names, dates, account numbers. Whoever this was, they had serious intel. By the time the call ended, Sarah was wide awake, her mind racing with possibilities. "Johnson," she barked, striding into the office an hour later. "I need everything we got on a Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, and get me a liaison at the SEC. We might have a big one on our hands." Across town, Ethan Blackwood sat in his car, heart pounding as he ended the call. The burner phone felt heavy in his hand as he tossed it into the passenger seat. There was no going back now. He had just set in motion a chain of events that would either save him or destroy him completely. His phone buzzed his real phone this time. A message from Liam. Package delivered to SC. Ball's in their court now. Ethan allowed himself a smile. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was about to hit them. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. FBI agents combed through financial records, following the trail of breadcrumbs Ethan and his team had carefully laid out. SEC investigators pored over Victoria's business dealings, uncovering layers of fraud and deceit. Victoria, meanwhile, was beginning to sense that something was amiss. Her carefully crafted world was showing cracks, and she didn't like it one bit. She paced her luxury apartment, phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed into the receiver. "Find out who's been digging into our affairs and shut them down. Now." But it was too late. The walls were already closing in, and Victoria's desperate attempts to plug the leaks only served to draw more attention to her activities. As the pressure mounted, Victoria made a fatal mistake. In a moment of panic, she attempted to blackmail Ethan with fabricated evidence of misconduct. It was a desperate ploy, a last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation. What Victoria didn't know was that Liam had been working tirelessly to secure Ethan's digital footprint. Every email, every text message, every financial transaction, all of it was backed up and verified. Her clumsy attempt at blackmail fell flat, serving only to add another charge to the growing list of her crimes. Ethan received Victoria's blackmail attempt with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Anger at her audacity, at the depths of her betrayal, but satisfaction, too, because this was the final piece of the puzzle. With this, they had her dead to rights. He forwarded the blackmail attempt to Agent Donovan, along with Liam's evidence proving its fabrication. Then, he sat back and waited for the hammer to fall. He didn't have to wait long. The next morning, as Ethan sipped his coffee and pretended to review blueprints at work, all hell broke loose. News alerts began popping up on his phone. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Con artist Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Thornton, wanted by FBI. SEC launches investigation into Blackwood Enterprises. Ethan's colleagues gathered around the break room TV, watching in shock as Victoria's face flashed across the screen, followed by Xavier's. The newscaster's voice was hard as she detailed the charges. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and more. Marcus appeared at Ethan's side, his face a mask of concern. "Ethan, man, did you know about any of this?" Ethan allowed his mask to slip just a little. He let Marcus see a glimpse of the pain, the anger, the satisfaction. "I had my suspicions," he said quietly, "but I never imagined it went this deep." As his co-workers buzzed with shock and speculation, Ethan slipped away to the restroom. He locked himself in a stall, took a deep breath, and allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. They'd done it. The trap had sprung, and Victoria and Xavier were caught right in the middle of it. But Ethan knew better than to celebrate too early. This was just the beginning. Victoria and Xavier were cornered animals now, and there was no telling what they might do in their desperation to escape. As he splashed water on his face, steeling himself for the media frenzy that was sure to follow, Ethan made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. Victoria and Xavier had tried to destroy him. Now, they would learn the true meaning of destruction. Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, sat in the first-class lounge of JFK International Airport, his leg bouncing nervously as he checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign that his hastily laid plans were about to unravel. The burner phone in his pocket buzzed. He fished it out with trembling hands, his heart rate spiking as he read the message from his contact. FBI en route. ETA 10 minutes. Get out now. Shit, Xavier muttered, shoving the phone back in his pocket and grabbing his carry-on. He'd known the walls were closing in, but he hadn't expected them to move this fast. He should have left days ago, but the promise of one last big score had been too tempting to resist. As he strode towards the exit, a flash of red caught his eye. A breaking news cheering scrolled across the bottom of a nearby TV screen. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Xavier froze, his blood running cold. If they had Victoria, it was only a matter of time before she gave him up. Self-preservation had always been her strongest trait. With renewed urgency, he quickened his pace, mind racing as he formulated a new escape plan. He'd need cash, a new identity, maybe a boat to slip out of the country undetected. But first, he had to get out of this damn airport. As Xavier pushed through the revolving doors into the humid New York night, he allowed himself a moment of bitter reflection. Victoria had been a means to an end, nothing more. A convenient mark with deep pockets and useful connections. But in his haste to cut and run, he'd left her to face the music alone. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Across town, Victoria Blackwood paced the polished floors of her penthouse apartment, a glass of scotch clutched in her manicured hand. The TV blared in the background, endlessly repeating the story of her downfall. "This is impossible," she muttered, taking another gulp of the amber liquid. "I covered my tracks. We covered our tracks." But the evidence scrolling across the screen told a different story. Bank records, witness testimonies, surveillance footage. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and Victoria found herself facing a terrifying reality. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Her phone had been ringing nonstop for hours. Lawyers, business associates, so-called friends, all wanting answers she couldn't provide. She'd stopped answering after the third call, unable to bear the thinly veiled accusations and hasty distancing. As the scotch burned its way down her throat, Victoria's thoughts turned to Xavier. Where was he? Why hadn't he contacted her? A cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized the truth. He'd abandoned her, just like she'd abandoned Ethan. Ethan, the name sent a jolt through her system. In all the chaos, she'd almost forgotten about her soon-to-be ex-husband. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. If anyone could help her out of this mess, it was Ethan. He'd always been the steady one, the fixer. Surely, if she appealed to their history, the love they'd once shared. With shaking hands, Victoria reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Ethan's name, her thumb hovering over the call button. Taking a deep breath, she pressed it, bringing the phone to her ear. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Victoria. Ethan's voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. "Ethan, thank God." Victoria breathed, relief flooding her system. "I need your help. It's all falling apart, and I don't know what to do. Please. I know I hurt you, but no." The single word cut through her rambling like a knife. "What?" Victoria asked, thrown off balance by the flat refusal. "I said no, Victoria," Ethan repeated, his voice hard as steel. "You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences." "But Ethan, please," Victoria pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. "We were married for 13 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Victoria dared to hope. Then Ethan spoke again, his words dripping with contempt. It meant everything to me, Victoria. But I was just a tool to you, remember? Well, this tool is done fixing your messes. Goodbye. The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in disbelief. She'd always prided herself on her ability to manipulate people, to bend them to her will. But Ethan had changed. The man she'd just spoken to was a stranger, cold, unyielding, and completely beyond her reach. As the reality of her situation sank in, Victoria felt the last vestiges of her composure crumble. She sank to the floor, the empty Scotch glass rolling away as sobs racked her body. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as the bailiff called for order. Journalists scrambled for prime positions, their pens poised over notepads, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be the trial of the decade. At the defense table, Xavier Reeves and Victoria Blackwood sat side by side, a study in contrasts. Xavier exuded an air of casual indifference, his handsome features arranged in a mask of bored contempt. Victoria, on the other hand, was a tightly wound spring, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her designer suit. As the judge entered and the court was called to session, a hush fell over the room. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached the bench. Your Honor, the state calls Ethan Blackwood to the stand. A ripple of excitement passed through the spectators as Ethan made his way to the witness box. He cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, his face a study in calm determination. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, his eyes briefly met Victoria's. She flinched at the cold steel she saw there, quickly averting her gaze. The prosecutor began her questioning, leading Ethan through the sordid details of Victoria and Xavier's schemes. With each response, Ethan's voice grew stronger, more assured. He painted a vivid picture of betrayal, fraud, and callous disregard for the lives they'd ruined. From her seat at the defense table, Victoria watched in growing horror as Ethan systematically dismantled the life she'd built. Every lie, every manipulation, every fraudulent deal. He laid them all bare, backed by a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Xavier, for his part, maintained his facade of indifference. But those who looked closely might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. As Ethan's testimony continued, Xavier's eyes darted more and more frequently to the exits, like a cornered animal seeking escape. When it came time for cross-examination, Victoria and Xavier's high-priced defense attorney did his best to poke holes in Ethan's story. But Ethan remained unflappable, his responses measured and precise. For every attempted gotcha, Ethan had a ready answer, often supported by additional evidence that only served to further incriminate the defendants. As the defense attorney returned to his seat, defeat evident in the slump of his shoulders, the prosecutor called her next witness, Sofia Alvarez. Victoria's head snapped up at the name, her eyes widening in shock as her former business partner took the stand. Sofia's testimony was damning, providing intimate details of Victoria's fraudulent business practices and manipulative personality. She told me it was just creative accounting, Sofia said, her voice thick with emotion. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. She'd set me up to take the fall if anything went wrong. As Sofia's testimony continued, Victoria felt the last threads of her defense unraveling. She leaned over to her lawyer, whispering urgently. The attorney frowned, shaking his head, but Victoria persisted. Finally, the attorney stood. Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court. The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded his assent. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I'd like to make a deal, she said, her voice quavering. I have information about Xavier, about others involved in our operations. I'm willing to testify, to tell you everything I know. Xavier's head whipped around, his eyes blazing with fury. You treacherous bitch, he snarled, lunging towards Victoria. The bailiffs rushed to restrain him as chaos erupted in the courtroom. As Xavier was dragged away, hurling threats and obscenities, Victoria locked eyes with Ethan once more. This time, she saw something flicker behind the steely exterior. Not sympathy or forgiveness, but a satisfaction. In that moment, Victoria realized the full extent of her fall. She'd lost everything: her wealth, her status, her freedom. But worst of all, she'd lost the one person who had truly loved her, and there was no going back. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Ethan Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the play of light on the gleaming skyscrapers. Behind him, the sounds of celebration filled the room. Laughter, the clink of glasses, excited chatter. His team had just landed the biggest contract in the firm's history, a prestigious international project that would put them on the map in a whole new way. "There's the man of the hour." Marcus's booming voice cut through the noise as he approached, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "How does it feel to be on top of the world, my friend?" Ethan turned, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It feels pretty damn good, Marcus. We've come a long way." Marcus nodded, his expression growing serious for a moment. "We have indeed. There were times I wasn't sure you'd make it through after. Well, you know." Ethan's mind flashed back to those dark days after Victoria's betrayal, the struggle to keep his head above water as his personal and professional life threatened to implode. He remembered the unwavering support of friends like Marcus, the dogged determination of Olivia as she helped uncover the truth, the technical wizardry of Liam that had been instrumental in bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast. "To friends who become family, and to new beginnings." As if on cue, Olivia appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "What are we toasting to?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Ethan pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "To us," he said simply. "To surviving the storm and coming out stronger on the other side." Olivia's smile widened, a mix of pride and love shining in her eyes. What had started as a professional collaboration during the investigation had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. In Olivia, Ethan had found not just a partner, but a true equal. Someone who challenged him, supported him, and understood him in a way Victoria never had. As the party continued around them, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The pain of betrayal, the thirst for revenge, the long nights spent building a case against those who had wronged him. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. Victoria and Xavier were serving long prison sentences, their empire of lies and fraud dismantled. The victims of their schemes, including Sofia Alvarez, had received restitution and a measure of justice. And Ethan had emerged from the crucible stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the true riches in his life. "Penny for your thoughts?" Olivia asked, squeezing his hand gently. Ethan shook his head, chuckling softly, just thinking about how sometimes the best revenge is living well. Olivia nodded, understanding flashing in her eyes. "And are you?" "Living well, I mean." Ethan looked around the room, taking in the faces of his friends and colleagues. His gaze settled on Olivia, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. "You know what?" he said, pulling her closer. "I really am." As the celebration continued into the night, Ethan allowed himself to fully embrace the moment. The past was behind him, the future bright with promise. He had weathered the storm, faced his demons, and come out the other side not just intact, but triumphant. In the end, Victoria's cruel words had proven prophetic, though not in the way she had intended. Ethan had indeed been a tool for justice, for redemption, and ultimately for his own salvation. And as he raised his glass one more time, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, Ethan Blackwood knew that he had finally found the passion, spontaneity, and excitement that had been missing from his life for far too long. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And Ethan was ready to embrace them all, one triumphant step at a time. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.